I had been looking forward to Christmas in Vermont for months. After a rough year, I wanted something quiet. Snow, a cabin, no one around except my husband, Mark, and our dog, Rusty. We rented an old cabin outside a tiny town called Brattleboro, a place so small the main street had only one gas station, a diner, and a hardware store. The cabin was deep in the woods, 30 minutes from town, with a long driveway that wound between evergreens heavy with snow. The owners advertised it as secluded, peaceful, perfect for the holidays. At first, it was everything we expected. We arrived the day before Christmas Eve, unpacked the car, and lit the fireplace. Outside, the snow fell in thick sheets, muffling all sound except the wind through the trees. Rusty ran in circles, chasing snowflakes. That night, we made hot cocoa and tried to ignore the small noises the cabin made, the wood settling, the wind rattling the shutters. Mark joked about ghosts, but I laughed nervously, feeling the kind of unease that comes from being somewhere too quiet. On Christmas Eve, we decided to explore the surrounding woods. Rusty ran ahead, and we followed a narrow trail that led to a frozen pond. Everything was still, and the forest felt unreal in the heavy snow. On the way back, Mark spotted something odd. A small, handmade wooden figurine tucked between two trees. It was a crude Santa, painted in red and white, holding a tiny axe instead of a gift. "Someone left it here as a joke," Mark said, picking it up. I shivered. There was something about it, the way the eyes were painted, too sharp, too knowing. We left it on a rock by the trail and went back to the cabin, trying not to think about it. That night, I woke around 2 a.m. to the sound of bells. Faint but clear. Not the kind of jingle you hear from decorations. It was a slow, heavy, deliberate ringing. I nudged Mark, but he didn't wake. I stepped outside, barefoot in the snow, trying to locate the sound. The driveway was empty, no footprints except ours from earlier. I shrugged, convinced it was Rusty playing with something, and went back to bed. Christmas morning, we woke to more snow, deep enough to cover the mailbox. Rusty was acting strange. He growled at the windows, ears back, hackles raised. Mark went outside to shovel while I brewed coffee. When I went out to help, I noticed something terrifying. Footprints in the snow, large, human, but too wide, with boots that left strange, uneven impressions. They led from the edge of the woods, past the cabin, and stopped at the front door. We were the only ones here. Mark laughed nervously. Probably a neighbor, maybe a hunter. But no one came to the door. No car tracks, no other footprints in the surrounding snow. We tried to ignore it. We opened presents, ate breakfast, and watched old Christmas movies. But the feeling never left. Rusty refused to leave the living room. That afternoon, Mark went to check the woodpile behind the cabin. He returned pale, shaking. "Someone's been here," he said. "Fresh snow, chopped wood, and look." He held up another figurine, another crude Santa, this one holding a knife. It had been placed carefully on the porch railing facing the cabin. I felt my stomach turn. "Okay, this isn't funny anymore," I said. We decided to call the owners. No answer. The cell signal was weak, and eventually we got voicemail. Mark tried again. Then I noticed something outside. Snow-covered footprints led up to the cabin, circling it in a perfect loop. They were large, human-like, but the spacing was wrong. Too long for Mark, too short for anyone normal. That night I barely slept. Around 1 a.m. the bells started again. Slow, deliberate, and then scratching. At the windows, at the doors. Rusty growled continuously, hair standing on end. I woke Mark. "Someone's outside." I whispered. We barricaded the doors with chairs and the heavy dining table, then sat in the living room, lights on, watching the windows. The noise grew louder, closer. Then came a pounding, not a knock, but heavy thuds like someone was trying to break through. I thought about calling the police, but the signal was gone. All we had was a landline in the kitchen. I picked up the receiver. Dead. Then we heard it. Breathing. Deep, slow, deliberate, coming from the back of the cabin. Rusty barked and lunged toward the sound. The lights flickered. I grabbed a poker from the fireplace. The back door burst open. Snow flew into the cabin, and standing there was him, a man, or something like a man, wearing a Santa suit, dirty, torn, the red faded to gray. His beard was matted, his eyes black and hollow, reflecting the firelight. In his hands he held something wrapped in red cloth, something alive. It was a baby doll at first, but then he pulled off the cloth. I couldn't look for long. It was a live bird, small and flailing, blood dripping from its chest. He laughed, a low, wet sound, and stepped inside, moving faster than seemed possible. Every step he took, the bells on his suit jingled. Mark yelled and swung the poker, hitting him in the shoulder. He didn't flinch. He raised the doll higher. "This is for you," he said. I screamed and grabbed the rifle Mark kept for emergencies. We fired together. The man stumbled, cursed, and then ran into the woods. We didn't sleep again. We stayed awake, sitting in the dark, listening to the wind, terrified he might come back. Morning came slowly. When we dared to step outside, the snow around the cabin was covered with footprints, hundreds of them, circling the cabin, heading into the woods. Each print ended abruptly, as if the man had vanished into the air. We left immediately. The owners later told us the cabin had a history. In the 1970s, a man named Harold Crane lived in a nearby shack. He disappeared in December 1978. Neighbors said he was obsessed with Christmas, that he hated families, that he would leave crude gifts in the woods, some harmless, some not. His body was never found. Some believed he never died at all. Every year since then, I've avoided cabins. Christmas no longer feels like joy. It feels like a warning. Sometimes when the wind is right and the snow falls in heavy sheets, I can still hear the bells, far off, deliberate, calling my name. I can't explain it. I don't try anymore. I just lock the doors and pray it stays in the woods away from anyone else. Story the end. The snow started early that Christmas Eve, heavy and relentless, covering the streets of a small town in upstate New York. I was 19, driving my rusted Honda Civic back to my parents' house from my job at the grocery store. The roads were slippery, the wind howling like it wanted to push cars off the road. I remember gripping the wheel tighter than usual, nodding, telling myself I'd make it home in time to see the Christmas tree lit up and hear my dad's awful rendition of Silent Night. I had about 10 miles left when I saw the accident. A car had spun out on the slick road and was sitting sideways across the lanes. Its hazard lights blinked faintly, and the driver, an older man, was standing next to it, waving his arms. Something about him didn't sit right with me. He was tall, thin, and hunched slightly as if the cold was pressing him down, but there was an odd steadiness to him, a calmness that seemed unnatural in the chaos of the storm. I slowed, debating whether to stop. People always say to help, but every instinct in me screamed not to. The roads were empty, the town miles away, and the visibility nearly zero. Finally, guilt outweighed caution. I pulled over and rolled down my window. "Need a hand?" I shouted over the wind. He nodded. "Car won't start? Battery's dead." I grabbed my jumper cables from the trunk, trying to ignore the feeling in the pit of my stomach that was screaming danger. We worked in silence. He didn't speak much, just nodded at my questions, his eyes dark beneath the brim of a worn baseball cap. The cables didn't work. The engine wouldn't turn over. He cursed softly under his breath. "I guess I'm walking," he said finally. "It's not far to the next town. Mind if I tag along?" I hesitated. My gut screamed no, but the storm was worsening. I nodded. "Sure. Just stay close." We walked along the edge of the road. The snow crunched under our feet, the wind cutting through our coats. He never smiled, never spoke unless I asked something, and when he did, his voice was oddly soft, almost hypnotic. I kept glancing at him, feeling like he was studying me, memorizing the way I moved, the way I breathed. After maybe 15 minutes, a small cabin appeared at the edge of the woods. Warm light spilled from the windows, and I felt a surge of relief. I knocked on the door. My neighbor, an elderly woman named Mrs. Keller, answered. I explained about the man, and she waved him in without question. That's when the nightmare started. I had gone inside to make hot chocolate for the three of us. When I returned to the living room, the man was sitting on the couch, watching Mrs. Keller with a strange intensity. He didn't look at me, just her. "I should probably get going soon," he said softly. "Don't want to overstay my welcome." Mrs. Keller smiled nervously. "You're welcome to stay for a bit. It's so cold out there." He didn't answer. He just kept staring. Something clicked in my head, a small voice warning me that I had made a terrible mistake. I moved closer to Mrs. Keller, placing a protective hand on her shoulder. That's when I noticed the knife. It was thin, long, and sharp. He held it loosely in his right hand, the tip catching the light. My stomach dropped. "You're cold," he said suddenly, his voice eerily calm. "I can warm you up." I stepped in front of Mrs. Keller. "No, you're leaving. Now." He tilted his head, studying me like a cat watching a mouse. "No need for that," he said. "We're just going to have a little Christmas celebration." Then he lunged. I grabbed a lamp and swung it, hitting him in the shoulder. He hissed, a sound like metal scraping wood, and stumbled back. I bolted toward the kitchen, grabbing a large carving knife. Mrs. Keller screamed. The storm outside made it impossible to hear anyone else. He came after me, slow but relentless. His movements were unnerving, too controlled, too precise. I slashed at him, missed, and he tackled me into the pantry. Cans toppled, glass shattered. I struggled, fists pounding him, screaming until my voice was raw. Somehow, I managed to shove him off, and he fell into the snowbank outside. I ran to the door, slamming it shut behind me, and locked it. My hands shook so badly I couldn't even dial 911. Snow was blowing so thick, it was like the world had disappeared. I heard a noise behind me, the back window. He was there, pressing his face against the glass, smiling now. His eyes were black, empty, and fixated. My chest tightened. My legs wouldn't move. I dropped to the ground, curling into a ball. The storm raged, and I thought I was done for. Then, miraculously, headlights appeared down the road. A neighbor out checking his property. He shouted, and the man outside the window froze, then bolted into the woods like a shadow. The police came minutes later. They found the man's truck a few miles back, abandoned, no sign of him. Inside, they found a list of addresses, dates, and names, all women and elderly people who lived alone. Some had disappeared. Some had been found dead. Christmas Eve was his favorite night. People were distracted, trusting, vulnerable. Mrs. Keller never fully recovered. She moved in with her daughter after that. I never went back to that cabin. Every Christmas since, I stay inside. I lock all the doors, check every window, every snowstorm, I relive those minutes. That man's face, the way he smiled with nothing behind his eyes, haunts me. I don't drive on country roads in winter. I don't stop for stranded cars. I don't trust strangers, even when it's Christmas. The news sometimes reports disappearances around the holidays. Every time I feel a knot in my stomach. I know that somewhere out there in the cold, someone is waiting, patient and silent, knowing Christmas Eve is the perfect night to strike. I will never forget the sound of that snow crunching, the wind howling, and the calm voice telling me we're just going to have a little Christmas celebration. I was 19, naive, and lucky. Most people aren't so lucky. Story the end. It started the week before Christmas in a small town in upstate New York. The kind of place where everyone knew everyone else, where the streetlights flickered faintly in the snow, and where winter came early and stayed late. I was 26 and had just moved into a tiny rented house on the outskirts of town. The previous tenant had left in a hurry, leaving the furniture, some dishes, and a calendar still pinned to the wall. The landlord insisted it was all part of the charm, but to me it just felt cold and strange. I was working at a small grocery store, stocking shelves and helping customers wrap gifts. It was quiet that year. Snow had been falling heavily for days, and the roads were slick. Most people stayed home. I was alone in my little house, unpacking boxes, trying to make it feel like a home for the first time in years. It began the night of December 18th. I had been cooking dinner when I heard the first sound, a soft, dragging noise from the basement. The house had an unfinished basement, mostly empty, except for an old furnace, stacks of boxes, and a few tools left behind by the previous tenant. At first, I thought it was the wind, rattling the pipes, but the sound was deliberate, slow, scraping along the concrete floor. I called out, "Hello?" No answer. My voice sounded small in the cold, cavernous space. I shined a flashlight down the narrow stairs. Nothing. Just shadows, long and shifting, stretching with the beam. I convinced myself it was an animal, rats, maybe, or a stray cat that had gotten inside. I locked the basement door and went to bed. The next night, the sound returned. This time, it was louder. Not in the basement, inside the house, upstairs, like someone was walking across the floorboards in deliberate, uneven steps. I lay in bed, heart racing, listening as the footsteps moved slowly from the living room to the hallway, then to the kitchen, and back again. It wasn't fast. It wasn't hurried. It was deliberate, like someone testing the house, checking its doors, watching its walls. I didn't sleep well, and by the time December 20th came around, I was exhausted. Snow had piled up outside, covering the driveway in a thick, undisturbed layer. When I opened my door to take out the trash, I saw something that froze me. Footprints. Bare footprints. large, wide, stepping from the edge of my porch to the side of the house and disappearing into the snow. They weren't mine, and I had no idea how anyone could have gotten there without leaving more tracks. I called the police, but the dispatcher laughed. It's probably just a neighbor playing tricks, they said. It's Christmas season. Kids get bored. They promised to drive by the next day. That night I was up again, trying to read but too nervous to focus. At exactly 11:47 p.m., the power went out. The house went completely silent except for the wind outside. And then from the hallway, I heard it. A whispering, low and breathy. Not words, just something hissing like it was testing my attention. My flashlight flickered on and I pointed it down the hall. The shadows seemed to stretch, pooling in the corners, forming shapes that weren't supposed to be there. I froze. The sound came closer. One step, then another, heavy, uneven. I tried to tell myself it was my imagination, but the steps stopped just outside my bedroom door. Then came a soft scraping like nails on wood. I bolted from the bed, grabbed a baseball bat, and swung the door open. Nothing, just the hallway, empty and silent. My heart pounded. I checked every room, every closet, every corner. No one, nothing. By December 22nd, I was exhausted and jittery. I didn't leave the house except for work, and even then, I moved quickly, never looking around. That night, I slept with the TV on for company, a dim light against the darkness creeping in. Around 2 a.m., I woke to the sound of breathing, low, wet, uneven, coming from the kitchen. I grabbed the flashlight and crept down the hall. The kitchen light was off, but there, on the counter, was a figure. At first, I thought it was a mannequin, one of those decorative things people put out for Christmas. But as I focused, I realized it wasn't still. It swayed slightly, breathing shallow, uneven breaths. Its skin was pale, almost gray, stretched tight over its bones. Its eyes were dark hollows. And its mouth stretched into a grin that wasn't human, wide and wrong. I screamed, swung the bat, and the figure vanished. I ran to my car and drove to the nearest gas station, shaking and mumbling to anyone who would listen. They thought I was joking or insane. By the time I returned, hours later, snow had erased every footprint, every sign of entry. Christmas Eve arrived, heavy with snow and wind. I planned to leave town, but the roads were closed. I was trapped. That night I tried to eat, tried to calm myself. Every sound made me jump. The wind, the house settling, the furnace. Every noise could be it. At midnight, I heard a soft tapping. Not footsteps, tapping, coming from the window. I froze. Outside, the snowstorm had turned the world white. No one could have been out there. And yet the tapping continued. Slow, deliberate, measured. I approached the window, heart in my throat. The snow had built up in thick layers, but as I looked closer, I saw something moving beneath the drift. A hand. Pale. Thin. Long fingers that ended in what looked like claws. It scraped at the glass, trying to reach me. I stumbled back, tripping over the rug. The sound didn't stop. The tapping continued, moving to the front door, then the back, then the windows all around the house. I tried to call 911, but the line was dead. My cell had no signal. The snowstorm had cut me off completely. I remember grabbing a candle, shaking as I lit it, trying to make myself feel safe, but safety didn't exist. Not that night. Not ever. The tapping stopped. Then the scraping came from inside, from the basement. The door I had locked weeks ago now rattled violently as if someone or something was trying to break through. I ran to the door, pulled the handle, and it was ice cold. Not cold like winter, but like something living had touched it, leaving its essence behind. The scraping grew louder, heavy, wet, deliberate. I screamed, banged on the door, and then I heard it. A voice. Low, whispering, impossibly deep and hollow. Come down. It's Christmas. We're waiting. I backed away. The voice didn't belong to any human I had ever known. It was older, hungrier, filled with centuries of waiting. The basement door slammed open on its own. A wind, frigid and unnatural, blew through the house. Papers flew, dishes shattered, the candle blew out. I ran, bare feet slipping on shattered glass and wood. Outside, the snow had stopped. The world was quiet. But when I looked back at the house, I saw something impossible. The basement window glowed with a faint red light. And I saw shapes moving inside. Faces pressed to the glass, long limbs twisting at unnatural angles. They stared at me, waiting. I drove all night, through back roads, through snow, through fear. I never went back. The house still stands, abandoned now, slowly sinking into the snow and ice of that small town. Locals whisper about it, but no one dares approach. Every year since, I avoid being alone on Christmas Eve. Every year, I dream about that basement, about those faces pressed to the glass, about the tapping and the scraping and the voice calling me back. And every year, I wake to the sound of my own front door rattling gently, as if someone is outside, testing it. I have moved twice since that winter, and every Christmas Eve, I find myself checking the locks, double checking the windows. I hear the tapping sometimes, I hear the scratching, and I remember that night. The night I saw something that shouldn't exist, something that waits for people alone, trapped on snowy Christmas nights. I've never told anyone the full story. Most wouldn't believe me, but I know what I saw. I know what I felt. And I know, as sure as I breathe, that it's still out there, waiting for the next person foolish enough to be alone on Christmas. Story. The end. The snow came early that year, a thick, wet blanket that covered the town of Millersville, Pennsylvania, in a heavy silence. By the time December 23rd rolled around, the streets were nearly impassable, the wind blowing in sharp, stinging gusts that bent the bare trees and rattled the shutters on old houses. It was the kind of Christmas people remembered for its beauty, but for me, it became the kind of Christmas people never forgot for its terror. I was 26, living in the small apartment above my mother's bookstore on Main Street. I'd stayed in town for the holidays after my first year in the city, wanting to reconnect with family and old friends. The night of the 23rd started normally. My mom and I had baked cookies, set up the tree in the living room, and hung stockings by the fireplace. The lights twinkled softly, reflecting in the snow outside, and for a moment, I could forget that the world outside Millersville had its usual chaos. Around 9 o'clock, I stepped outside to take the dog for a last walk. He was a wiry little terrier named Max, but usually he had no patience for long strolls in cold weather. That night, though, he seemed restless, whining and tugging at the leash. As we walked down the street, I noticed a man standing near the edge of the park across from the old church. He was tall, thin, and wore a red coat that looked cheap and worn. On any normal night, I wouldn't have thought much of it. People wore all sorts of things during winter, but there was something wrong about him. He wasn't moving like other people. His arms hung stiffly at his sides, and his head tilted just slightly, like he was observing everything, but not quite humanly. Max growled low in his throat, hairs standing on end. I tugged the leash, telling him to calm down, but the growl didn't stop. Then the man started walking toward me, slowly. His steps were deliberate, measured, almost gliding through the snow. My stomach tightened, and for some reason, I felt frozen in place. I called out, "Hey, can I help you?" But he didn't respond, just kept coming closer. When he got within 20 feet, I could see his face. Pale, almost chalky, eyes dark and hollow. His mouth stretched wide, unnaturally so, a smile that didn't reach his eyes. In his hands, he carried a burlap sack that swayed slightly with his steps. I backed up. "Go away! You're scaring me!" My voice cracked, and the wind carried it into the empty street. The man stopped, tilted his head, and whispered something so low I couldn't hear it over the wind. Then he raised the sack and let it drop onto the snow with a heavy thud. Max barked furiously, and I lunged forward to pull him back. I ran all the way home, slipping on ice and cursing, and when I slammed the door behind me, I locked it and bolted it twice. My mother was in the kitchen, humming as she arranged cookies on a plate. "What's wrong?" she asked. "There's someone outside," I panted. Tall, wearing red, he dropped a sack on the sidewalk. My mother's face changed. She paled. Did he look human? I don't know. Not really. He had something wrong with him. She didn't say more. She just poured me a cup of hot cocoa and urged me to calm down. But I couldn't shake it. I didn't sleep well that night, and when morning came, there was a thin layer of snow on the porch, but no footprints. Nothing. It was as if the man had appeared and vanished. The next day, Christmas Eve, I drove my mom's old SUV to the grocery store to pick up last-minute ingredients. The snow had let up slightly, but roads were still slick. On my way back, I saw him again, across the street, near the closed-down hardware store. He was watching me, standing in the falling snow, the red coat bright against the gray morning. His sack was still there, slung over one shoulder. I froze. My heart raced. When I blinked, he was gone. No footprints in the fresh snow, no tire tracks. Just gone. That evening, we invited my cousin and his family over for dinner. The table was heavy with food: turkey, mashed potatoes, stuffing, pies cooling on the counter. Outside, the snow began again, heavier this time. Around 8, the lights flickered and went out completely. We lit candles and huddled in the living room. Max refused to leave my side, whining and growling at the windows. Then we heard it, a slow, deliberate tapping on the front door. My mother froze. "Don't," she whispered. Another tap. Then a voice, low, cold, almost like gravel scraping against metal. "Let me in." I backed away from the door. "It's okay," I said, though my voice trembled. "We're not. It's just snow. Someone stuck outside." "Let me in," the voice repeated, louder this time, closer. The handle rattled. The door shook, as if someone heavy pressed against it. My cousin tried to open the door slightly. My mother slammed her hand down. "No, don't open it." Another sound came then, a scraping like claws on wood, slow and deliberate. Max barked, lunging toward the door, but I held him back. I could see his shadow through the frosted glass. The red coat, the twisted smile, the sack shifting slightly like something moved inside. My stomach churned. I didn't know if it was human, and I didn't want to find out. The scratching stopped. Then silence. Minutes later, we heard it again, but from the back of the house. Soft, deliberate, moving across the kitchen tiles. Something heavy dragging against the floor. We locked ourselves in the living room, crouched near the fireplace, whispering, trying to stay calm. The house seemed to breathe around us, each gust of wind making the windows rattle, every shadow stretching impossibly long. When morning came, we checked the house. Doors and windows were locked, undisturbed. Nothing had been broken. But outside, the snow was littered with footprints. Massive, far too large for any human. They led from the street to our front door and stopped abruptly at the porch. No path back. The police came when we called. They checked the perimeter, found nothing, and wrote it off as pranksters or hallucinations brought on by the storm. But my mother didn't speak for hours. When she finally did, she whispered a name I had never heard before. The Kringle Man. "He comes every few years," she said. "Your grandmother warned us. He doesn't take gifts. He takes people. Those who see him, those who answer the knock, they're gone by the next morning." I didn't believe her at first. I wanted to, but I couldn't. Then 2 days later, my cousin's family vanished. No note, no struggle, just gone. Their dog was left in the yard, collar broken, whimpering at nothing. Since then, every Christmas in Millersville carries the same fear. People leave lights on all night, don't answer knocks, children are warned to stay inside, doors locked tight. Every winter, someone disappears. No signs. No clues, only the snow, footprints that start and end where they shouldn't, and the memory of a tall man in a red coat carrying a moving sack. I left town after that Christmas, never returned. But each year when snow falls thick on Christmas Eve, I remember the tapping, the dragging, the impossible smile. And I remember my grandmother's warning. Kindness can lure him. Don't answer the door. Don't look outside. Some visitors come with more than goodwill. Even now, thousands of miles away, I can't forget the sound of his voice, low and hollow, whispering through the wind. "Let me in. It's Christmas." Story the end. It was Christmas Eve in 2013 in a quiet suburb of Buffalo, New York. The streets were lined with snow-dusted houses, each decorated with strings of blinking lights and inflatable Santas. Most of the neighborhood was asleep or settled indoors, but the McAllister house at the end of the cul-de-sac was eerily still. Inside, the family of 4 had just finished trimming their tree. The parents, Karen and Michael, were trying to get their 2 kids, 10-year-old Lily and 7-year-old Jacob, to bed early. They had plans to leave for Michael's parents' house in Rochester first thing in the morning. Everything seemed normal, peaceful even, the kind of picture-perfect Christmas scene that's been painted in magazines for decades. Around 11 p.m., Karen heard a faint scratching at the back door. At first, she thought it was the wind catching something loose from the roof or the branches brushing the siding. But the sound repeated, softer this time, like nails dragging lightly across wood. Michael shrugged it off when she mentioned it, saying it was probably a raccoon or a stray cat looking for food. They locked the doors and windows, turned off the lights, and went upstairs, assuming the noise would pass. Around midnight, Michael was the first to notice something off. He was downstairs, checking the presents under the tree one last time. The lights on the Christmas tree were flickering, though the plugs were secure. Then he saw it. the faint reflection of a shadow moving across the living room wall. He froze. It didn't look like a human figure. It was too long, too thin, and it didn't walk right. It slithered almost, moving unnaturally along the wall. Karen came downstairs after hearing his muttered curse. Michael tried to explain, but before he could finish, the shadow darted behind the couch. Both of them froze. That's when they heard the voice. At first, it was barely audible, like a whisper through a cracked vent. "I'm inside." Karen screamed and grabbed the phone to call 911. The line was dead. The lights flickered violently, then went out completely. The Christmas tree toppled over in the dark with a crash, scattering ornaments across the floor. They could hear scratching again, now coming from the kitchen, then the basement door. It was rhythmic, like something dragging itself across the floor. Michael grabbed a flashlight from the kitchen drawer and shone it toward the basement. The beam caught something crouched at the bottom of the stairs. He couldn't see a face, just the glint of eyes reflecting the light. It didn't move at first. Then it smiled. Too wide, too fast. A smile that wasn't human. Its head tilted unnaturally, almost as if it could rotate the wrong way. Michael dropped the flashlight. The creature lunged up the stairs in a blur. He and Karen bolted for the front door. It was locked. The key was missing. Then the children started screaming from upstairs. The parents ran back to the stairs. Lily was pressed against the wall. Jacob was screaming her name, both pale as snow. The creature moved through the hallway toward them, its limbs bending in impossible angles. It hissed and whispered all at once. Their last thought before they scrambled into the kitchen was to reach the back door. The knob was warm, almost hot to the touch, and the door wouldn't budge. Something on the other side was holding it. Karen grabbed a heavy skillet from the counter and swung it at the door. There was a sharp, wet sound. The creature shrieked, a high-pitched, inhuman wail. They finally broke the door free and ran into the snow outside, barefoot, despite the freezing night. They called 911 from a neighbor's house. When the police arrived, the McAllister house was empty. No sign of the intruder. No signs of forced entry. The basement door was wide open. The Christmas tree lay shattered in the living room. Every ornament had been shattered, even those that fell under the couch or against walls. But the most terrifying part was the smell. The officers described it as sweet and rotten at the same time, like sugar mixed with decay. Something in the air had left them gagging. Lily and Jacob were unharmed physically, though they were silent for hours, staring at the walls, shaking. They described a man with the wrong smile, and how he crawled through the walls like he wasn't even touching the floor. It didn't speak like a normal person. It whispered names, told them things, promised things, and then laughed when it wasn't supposed to. The children remembered seeing it behind their parents, in mirrors, in shadows cast by the Christmas lights, always watching, always grinning. When the children were asked to draw the figure, their sketches showed elongated limbs, a distorted face with a smile that stretched past its ears, and eyes that were just black holes. The police investigated the property thoroughly. No evidence of anyone having lived in the house recently. Nothing hidden in walls or crawl spaces. The town's crime lab found traces of something that looked like blood, but it didn't match any human DNA. It was almost organic, but not human. The family's pets, the 2 cats, were gone. No signs of struggle, no tracks outside. The only thing left behind were claw marks across the walls and floorboards. They were deep, almost carved in a way that suggested immense strength. The McAllisters stayed with relatives for a few days. On Christmas morning, they returned to the house with a police escort. Nothing had been touched since their initial escape. That evening, the parents tried to reassure the children it was over. But as they hung stockings, Jacob froze and pointed toward the fireplace. He whispered, "He's back." The parents turned. Nothing. But the fire in the hearth sputtered, though it had been untouched. The logs shifted slightly on their own. Then the lights on the Christmas tree blinked in a pattern. Blink, blink, blink. Almost like a message. Lily whispered, "He says our names." The parents told the children to go upstairs while they inspected. By the time they reached the top, the staircase was dark. The lights from the tree below went out entirely. The next morning, the police reported that they'd received multiple calls about shadows moving in the neighborhood. Neighbors had reported seeing a man, or something like a man, moving in the woods behind the houses. Some said they saw the figure standing silently in the middle of streets, smiling at passing cars, disappearing when approached. The McAllisters' house was watched for weeks, but nothing was ever caught. No cameras picked it up. No fingerprints. Only occasional claw marks, shallow at first, appearing on the siding and doors, almost as if it was practicing before the next Christmas. Over the next decade, the McAllisters moved several times. Each Christmas, the family would hear noises in the night, the faint scratching of nails along walls, footsteps in empty rooms, the subtle reflection of a smile in mirrors and windows. Even in new houses far from Buffalo, the children would wake screaming, pointing to empty corners. It followed them. Some intangible presence that defied physics. Shadows didn't fall naturally. Mirrors didn't reflect correctly. And every Christmas Eve, just as the family tried to settle in, they would hear whispers in their own voices, names being called, promises being made, threats implied, not in words exactly, but in something deeper, almost inside their heads. Experts called it a case of mass trauma and suggestive hysteria. Paranormal investigators who were given access found nothing conclusive. But Karen swears the scratches on the walls in every home they moved to appear the same day as Christmas Eve. Long, deep, deliberate. The marks can't be explained. Sometimes they find ornaments or decorations from previous years, placed perfectly around the house, even if those items were packed away in storage and untouched for months. Sometimes presents left under the tree would be moved or rearranged in ways that make no sense. One Christmas, Karen opened the fridge to find a child's drawing of the creature she had never seen before, scrawled on an old piece of wrapping paper. It wasn't Lily or Jacob's handwriting. It was crude, disproportionate, almost like the sketch from that first night in 2013. Michael, now divorced from Karen, says the same thing. He sees it in reflections while driving past houses, sometimes at rest stops, sometimes just out the corner of his eye in the grocery store. He describes the smile, always watching, waiting, and always appearing at Christmas. Each year, the family has tried to ignore it, to celebrate elsewhere, to spend the holidays far away, but they say it doesn't matter. Distance doesn't break the connection. Something about the timing, the 24th to the 25th, anchors it to them. And every Christmas, they fear that the thing they first encountered in Buffalo will finally decide it's time to finish what it started, claiming the family entirely as if the holiday itself demanded it. Even now, years later, Lily and Jacob, grown, refuse to live alone. They have roommates or partners, always someone in the room, and every Christmas Eve, each of them wakes in the middle of the night to the same thing, the faintest scratching at the door, the sudden chill in the air, and a whisper that sounds like someone calling their name from just outside the house, and then, inevitably, that smile reflected in the window, not quite human, stretching wider than it should. Story the end. It started on Christmas Eve in 2011 in a small town outside Buffalo, New York. Snow had been falling steadily for 3 days, thick and heavy, coating everything in white. Roads were slick, and most people had stayed home, preparing for Christmas morning. The call came in just after 8 p.m., a welfare check at a remote farmhouse on the outskirts of town. The caller was a neighbor, anxious because she hadn't seen the family, the Halloways, for more than a week. Their property sat isolated, surrounded by dense woods, the kind of place where you could disappear and no one would notice until the neighbors smelled something bad, or, in this case, when someone called the police. I arrived in my cruiser to find the driveway buried in snow, tire tracks leading up to the house, then ending abruptly at the garage. I knocked on the door, announcing myself as a deputy. There was no answer. No lights inside, except the faint glow of the Christmas tree in the living room, visible through the window. It cast eerie shadows across the furniture, making it look like someone or something was moving inside. The air was silent except for the low hum of the heater struggling against the winter cold. I stepped inside. The first thing I noticed was the smell, sour, coppery, unmistakable. Blood. The living room was decorated for Christmas, lights twinkling, ornaments hanging neatly on the tree. But it didn't feel festive. It felt staged. And then I saw them, the Halloways. The mother, father, and 2 children, all seated on the couch, dressed in their holiday best. Their heads tilted at odd angles, faces frozen in expressions of forced cheer. and every one of them had a deep cut along the neck, precise, almost surgical. Blood had pooled on the carpet, dark and sticky, mixing with tinsel and wrapping paper. I called for backup and tried not to vomit. As I stepped toward the tree, I realized it wasn't a normal Christmas tree. Every branch was stripped of ornaments except for a few, which were body parts. Fingers strung together with red thread, teeth drilled and hung like baubles. Sections of skin twisted into ribbons, polished until they gleamed in the tree's soft lights. At the top of the tree, where the star should have been, there was a skull, its jaw wired shut, a red Santa hat pulled low over empty eye sockets. The sight burned itself into my mind. I couldn't look away. Under the tree were wrapped gifts, each tagged with names. The families, yes, but also other names, ones I didn't recognize. Names that would appear in local missing person reports over the next year. We searched the house thoroughly. The basement held even worse. A small shrine had been built in the corner, candles arranged in a circle. On the walls were scratched symbols, letters, dates, some going back decades. It was clear that this wasn't just a one-off murder. This was ritualistic, planned, and possibly part of something far larger than any of us wanted to imagine. The suspect, Thomas Reed, a transient with a history of mental illness, was caught 2 days later in a motel near the interstate. He had cuts on his hands, blood under his fingernails, and a duffel bag full of bones in his trunk. He didn't speak much during questioning, just smiled when asked about the ornaments. "They like to be remembered," he said once, tilting his head at an invisible audience. He was charged, and we thought it was over. But Christmas doesn't forgive, and it doesn't end neatly. 3 years later, I had moved to Ohio. I worked in a new precinct and avoided Christmas decorations, keeping my home dark during the holidays. On December 20th, 2016, we got a call for a welfare check. Another family, single mother, 2 kids, no one had heard from them for a week. When officers arrived, the house appeared normal at first glance. Lights, wreaths, a small inflatable snowman in the yard, but the air inside was wrong. The same metallic sweet and rot smell that haunted my memories of Buffalo. The living room held a tree stripped bare except for ornaments. Human bone, teeth, hair woven into fragile strands, polished. The mother and children were found dead on the couch, dressed in holiday attire, posed as if watching TV. In the basement, a crude stick structure held more ornaments, each carved from bone and labeled with dates, 12/25/2011, 12/25/2012. My stomach turned. The handwriting matched the tags from the Holloway case. We had no suspect, no Thomas Reed. Nothing. The FBI got involved, tried to categorize it as ritualistic killings, but I knew what I saw. It was deliberate, precise, personal. That Christmas, I received a package at my apartment, brown paper tied with red string, no return address. Inside was an ornament carved from bone, a finger small and polished. Attached was a tag, my name. I froze. I called it in. Units came, but when they investigated, the ornament was gone. No one could explain it. Every year since, the pattern has continued. Different states, different victims, same method, same grotesque decorations. A tree, a shrine, ornaments crafted from human remains, labeled with names and dates. The oddest part is the timing. Always near Christmas, always a few miles from a road, near woods or secluded areas, always precise, as if the killer knows exactly what they're doing and why. In 2018, the FBI shared a file with me privately. The case was sensitive. They showed me maps, notes, photos, but the suspect was always one step ahead. Some of the ornaments had appeared in one location, only for the same style to appear hundreds of miles away months later. Whoever or whatever was doing this was not bound by geography in a way a human should be. The last time it happened was 2023, a small town in Michigan. Another family disappeared the week before Christmas. Their bodies were found after New Year's, arranged in the living room with a tree stripped bare except for a few ornaments. And at the top, always, a skull wearing a Santa hat. I saw a news clip. I recognized the handwriting on the tags immediately. I know it's coming for me. I have moved 6 times since 2011. I haven't put up a tree in over a decade. I don't decorate. I don't leave packages outside for my neighbors. But every Christmas Eve, just before midnight, there is a soft knock at my door. 3 taps, pause, 3 taps again. Always. No matter where I live. Last Christmas, 2024, there was a package on my porch. Brown paper, red twine. I didn't open it. I left it outside. When I went to check the next morning, it was gone. No tracks in the snow, no sign of anyone. I don't know if it's a copycat, or if Thomas Reed had help, or if there is a network I will never understand. I do know that it moves through Christmas like a shadow, leaving a tree behind. The ornaments are its calling card. And the dates, they count down like a calendar marking something I haven't yet survived to see. Tonight, Christmas Eve, 2025, the snow is falling thick. My phone buzzed earlier. Unknown number, no message. I know what it means. I know what will be at my door if I check. I don't know if I have the courage to ignore it. The tree is coming. The ornaments are waiting. And this time, it's personal. Story the end. It was Christmas Eve, 2003, in a small town outside Chicago. The streets were quiet, snow falling thick and fast, covering the town like a blanket, muffling everything except the occasional crunch of tires on icy roads. I had just finished my shift at the hospital, an overnight in the ER, and was driving home when I saw the flashing lights on the side of the road. At first, I thought it was a routine accident, but as I got closer, I realized something was wrong. There were no ambulances, no paramedics, just a small group of neighbors huddled in the snow, looking down at something I couldn't see. I parked and approached cautiously. That's when I saw it. A man, maybe in his late 60s, lying face down in the snow, completely still. He was wearing a Santa hat and an old tattered coat, but what caught my attention was the expression frozen on his face, eyes wide open, mouth slightly agape, as if he'd seen something he couldn't explain. The neighbors whispered among themselves, shaking their heads, muttering that this was what happens when you live alone at Christmas. I called 911 and waited, my breath fogging in the frigid air. When the ambulance arrived, they confirmed he was dead. The coroner later said it was hypothermia. But here's the thing. The man, Robert Miles, had lived alone in that house for decades, and his heating system was perfectly functional. There was no frostbite on his fingers or face, just that unnatural, rigid stillness. And then the neighbors started talking about the decorations in his yard. They'd seen them earlier that week, small things at first, a couple of inflatable snowmen, some lights along the eaves, but by the time he was found, the entire yard was covered in Christmas decorations, hundreds of them, all glowing brightly in the night snow. And among the lights and figures, there were dolls, hundreds of dolls, all posed like they were staring right at the house, faces frozen in smiles that didn't reach their painted eyes. I couldn't sleep that night. When I got home, the snow had piled against my windows, reflecting the street lights, and I swore I could see something moving in the shadows. I tried to shrug it off, blaming exhaustion and cold. But when I checked the local news the next morning, I saw a picture of Robert Miles's yard. What caught my attention wasn't the decorations. It was that in the front yard, right in the middle, was a small wooden box. In the photo, it looked ordinary, but those who had been there said it was open, and inside were photographs. Not just any photographs, but pictures of neighbors, people who lived on the same street. They were taken from outside their homes, people going about their daily lives, completely unaware they were being watched. The next few days were strange. More reports came in from nearby towns, similar deaths, all elderly, all found in their homes with the heat on, all surrounded by Christmas decorations that had appeared seemingly overnight. No forced entry, no fingerprints, nothing to suggest foul play. But the decorations, the photographs, the eerie way the victims were found, it was too much of a pattern to ignore. I remember December 23rd vividly. My friend Mark, a local cop, called me around midnight. He sounded shaken, something I had never heard before. He told me about a house 2 miles from mine belonging to a widow named Helen Carter. She'd been found dead in her living room, wrapped in her own Christmas tree lights, and surrounding her were photographs of everyone she knew, friends, neighbors, even her own children. The strangest part, Mark said, was that some of the photos were from events that hadn't happened yet, dates stamped in the future, as if someone had foreseen them. I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. It sounded insane, but Mark wasn't joking. He begged me to check on my own family, to make sure the house was secure. That night, I locked every door and window, unplugged the Christmas lights, and tried to stay awake. But at around 2 a.m., I heard it. Soft footsteps on the roof, then on the porch. I froze. My parents' house was 2 blocks away, and I knew they were asleep. Whoever it was, they weren't trying to break in. They were moving carefully, deliberately, like they were performing some kind of ritual. The next morning, my mother called me, voice trembling. She said a box had appeared on the front porch, wrapped in brown paper, tied with red string. No return address. Inside were photographs, pictures of my family, my friends, even strangers I didn't recognize. The dates on the back were all the same. Christmas Eve. I drove over immediately, heart racing. My mother had already brought the box inside, and when I opened it, I felt something deep in my chest freeze over. Among the photos was one of me, taken that very morning, standing in my driveway, looking at the box. I stayed with my family that day, refusing to go home. But the next morning, Christmas Eve, I got a call from Mark. Another death. This time, a couple in their 30s found in their home with the heat turned off, surrounded by Christmas decorations that had appeared overnight. The photographs included images of the victims themselves, and in the center, a small wooden box, the same kind of box that had appeared on my mother's porch. By the evening, the snowstorm had grown worse. Power lines were down, roads closed, and the town was silent except for the occasional siren. I was sitting by the fire, trying to keep warm, when I heard a knock at the door. I froze. My parents were asleep, and I knew no one should be outside. Another knock, louder this time, and then a voice, faint but clear, saying my name. I didn't open it. I stayed by the fire, watching shadows flicker on the walls. At midnight, the power went out. The fire sputtered and died. And then I saw them. Or felt them. Figures moving outside, around the house. Tall, thin, dressed in tattered clothing that looked old, their faces hidden in the darkness. They didn't speak. They didn't move like people. They just watched. And then as suddenly as they appeared, they were gone. The next morning, Christmas Day, everything was back to normal. The snow had stopped, the sun was shining, and there was no sign of anyone outside. But on the porch, another box waited. Brown paper, red string. Inside were more photographs, more images of me, my family, my friends. And at the bottom, a single note written in red ink, "See you next year." I left town that day, never went back. My parents moved away, my friends scattered. And every year, without fail, a box arrives in my mailbox around Christmas. I don't open them anymore. I burn them immediately. But the feeling never leaves. The sense of being watched, of something waiting just outside the warmth of your home, ready to slip in while you sleep, while you celebrate, while you think you're safe. I don't know who or what it is, only that it comes every year. And every year, the boxes get closer. Story the end. I remember that Christmas like it was yesterday, though I've tried for years to forget it. I was 24, working at a small hardware store in rural Ohio. It was the week before Christmas, and the town was buried under nearly 2 feet of snow from a storm that came out of nowhere. Everything had slowed to a crawl. The roads were nearly impassable, and the town felt quiet, too quiet, like the snow had muffled not just sound, but life itself. I was working the late shift on December 23rd, alone in the store except for the manager, a gruff man named Carl, who left early to check on his family. The last few customers trickled out by 9 p.m., leaving me to lock the doors and start stacking boxes in the back. That's when I first noticed it. Someone outside, moving between the snowdrifts. At first, I thought it was just a neighbor walking home, bundled in a coat, trudging through the deep snow. But something felt off. The figure didn't walk normally. It shuffled, almost dragging its feet. And its coat, it was bright red, hanging loose, stained with something dark at the hem. I called out through the glass doors. "Hey, you okay out there?" The figure stopped, turned, and for a brief second I could see its face. Pale, wide eyes, a thin smile that didn't reach its eyes. Then it ducked behind a snowbank and disappeared. I shrugged it off, telling myself the storm was messing with my mind. But the feeling didn't go away. When I went to lock the back door, I noticed footprints in the fresh snow. Huge, barefoot, or maybe in thin socks. They started from the alley behind the store and ended at the back door, stopping abruptly. My stomach sank. There was no way someone could have been back there without me seeing them. The alley was open. I was alone. I locked all the doors again and headed to the break room to get some coffee. That's when the phone rang. The store phone. I didn't even know it was working. The snowstorm had knocked out lines all over town. I froze, staring at the receiver. It rang again. I picked it up, half expecting it to be Carl checking in. Hello? My voice sounded small in the empty store. Silence. Then a low rasp. I'm inside. The line went dead. I slammed the phone down, my heart pounding. The break room door creaked. Slowly. I turned, and the shadow of the red coat passed under the crack. My first instinct was to run to the back door, but it was already locked. Then I realized the front doors were locked too, but the figure was inside. Somehow. I grabbed a baseball bat from behind the counter and crept toward the front. The fluorescent lights flickered, buzzing in the cold. I could hear a faint shuffling like snow sliding across linoleum. My hands were shaking so badly I nearly dropped the bat. Then I saw it, tracks in the dust along the linoleum floor. Small, barefoot prints. They ended at the break room. I threw the door open. Nobody was there, but the coffee pot had been knocked over. The coffee was everywhere, burned, steaming slightly despite the cold, and a message had been scrawled across the counter in it. Merry Christmas. I don't know how I didn't scream. I ran to the storage room, locking myself inside, shaking and crying. The footsteps followed, slow, dragging. They circled the room. I could hear the scrape of metal on metal as someone or something was moving boxes around, rearranging them silently, like it was preparing something. Hours passed. I don't know how long. The storm outside got worse. Eventually, the shuffling stopped. The silence was heavier than the footsteps had been. I dared to peek out of the storage room. The store was empty. Dust motes floated in the fluorescent light, and nothing seemed disturbed. Except for one thing. The main display of Christmas lights near the front door had been turned on. Not blinking, just glowing a steady, unnatural red. I thought it was a joke, maybe someone from town messing with me, but the lights were connected to the main breaker in the back room, which I had shut off. I called 911. The line was dead. I ran to the front door and tried to open it. It wouldn't budge, not even a little. The lock was jammed from the inside. My breath was fogging in the cold air coming through the cracked windows. Then I heard it. A soft thud, then another, coming from the ceiling. Someone was walking above me in the attic. I ran to the back of the store, trying every door, every window. Nothing. The attic door in the storage room was locked, but I could hear the floorboards creak as the shuffling moved back and forth. Then a voice, low, rasping, almost playful. Come play with me. I broke a window with the bat and climbed out into the snow. My clothes froze almost immediately, and the cold bit through me, but I didn't care. I ran into the street, snow up to my knees, screaming for anyone, anything. I didn't stop until I saw a police cruiser. The officers didn't believe me at first. They drove me back to the store, and nothing. The doors were unlocked. The lights were normal. The mess in the break room was gone. No footprints anywhere. Nothing. No signs anyone had been inside. The only thing that stayed with me was the smell, a faint metallic scent, like blood and iron mixed with pine. I moved out of town the next week. I never went back. Years later, I found a newspaper clipping buried in an old box of family photos. It was from 1983. A small store in a town a few counties over. A young woman working alone on Christmas Eve. The store closed early for the storm. She was never seen again. The police never found her. Witnesses claimed seeing a figure in a red coat in the area around that time, but nothing was ever proven. I realized then it hadn't been a prank, hadn't been a joke. It wasn't a person at all. The figure in the red coat was a predator, drawn to Christmas, to people alone and isolated, to fear and despair. I'd seen it. I'd lived through it. And if I'd stayed a minute longer in that store, I would have become part of the same story I found in the newspaper. Every year when Christmas nears, I dream about that night. The red glow of the lights, the scrawled message in coffee, the soft scraping of feet above me. I keep my doors locked, my windows covered. I never work alone, never stay late, never go anywhere where I'm isolated because I know it's still out there. And every year, somewhere, it's looking for someone alone, in the dark, on Christmas Eve. Story, the end. The snow started falling around 3 p.m., a heavy, wet December snow that made the roads slick and the streetlights halo in a pale orange glow. I was driving home from a late shift at the hospital, the highways mostly empty, the only sound, the rhythmic swish of the wipers and the faint hum of the heater. My mom had asked me to pick up a few last-minute groceries, and I figured I'd be home before sunset, enough time to wrap presents and get some dinner before Christmas Eve truly began. I never should have taken that shortcut. The road I took was one I had driven 1,000 times, a winding, two-lane stretch that cut through dense woods and farmland outside Rochester, New York. But that night it felt different. The snow muffled everything. The tires, the wind, even the trees themselves seemed to lean closer as I passed, skeletal fingers stretching over the road. I slowed down instinctively, gripping the steering wheel tighter. Then I saw it. At first, I thought it was a snowman someone had built at the edge of the road, but no one would build a snowman in the middle of the lane. And it wasn't moving. A man, wearing a dark coat and hat, standing directly in the center of the road, facing me. I slammed on the brakes. The car fishtailed slightly, my heart leaping into my throat. I was far enough away that I swerved around him, but as I passed, I caught his face in the headlights. Pale. Not frozen, not red from the cold, just wrong. His eyes were wide and glossy, reflecting the light in a way that didn't feel human. His mouth hung open slightly, almost smiling, but empty, lifeless. I didn't look back until I reached the next curve. He was gone. Shaking, I drove faster, hoping to put distance between us. I told myself it was a man playing a prank, a local kid who had wandered out in the storm. But deep down, I knew that wasn't it. By the time I reached my neighborhood, the snow was coming down in sheets, and the wind had picked up, rattling the old wooden houses. I parked in the driveway, my hands trembling as I grabbed the bags. My mother greeted me at the door, concerned at my pale face. "Everything okay?" she asked. "Yeah, just the storm," I lied, setting the bags on the kitchen counter. After dinner, I settled in the living room with a cup of cocoa and turned on the TV. The local news was running snowstorm coverage, but nothing mentioned accidents or stranded motorists in my area. I tried to calm myself, telling myself I had imagined the figure on the road. Around 11:45 p.m., I heard a scratching at the front door. I froze. The sound was faint, deliberate, like nails dragging across wood. "Mom?" I whispered. She didn't answer. She was in the kitchen cleaning up. I listened. The scratching continued for a few seconds, then stopped. I convinced myself it was the wind or a branch brushing against the siding. But when I turned to the window, I saw a dark figure standing just beyond the porch light. Not a shadow, but a person. Or something that looked like one, watching me. I couldn't move. My body refused. The figure didn't move, didn't speak, just stood there. And then slowly it raised its hand and waved. I blinked, and it was gone. I didn't sleep that night. Every creak in the house, every groan of the wind sounded like footsteps coming closer. I stayed in my room with the door locked, flashlight in hand, trying to convince myself it had been a hallucination born of fatigue and fear. At 2:12 a.m., I heard it again. This time it wasn't outside. It was inside. A soft, deliberate thump from the basement. I grabbed a baseball bat and crept down the stairs, each step protesting under my weight. The basement was cold, unnaturally so, despite the furnace running. The light from the bulb flickered, casting long, spindly shadows. I called out, voice shaking, but no answer came. Then I saw it, a small figure at the far end of the basement, half hidden in shadow. A child? No, too tall, too thin. It wore a Santa hat and a tattered red coat soaked in what looked like ice and snow. Its face was featureless, smooth, pale, except for two dark holes where its eyes should have been. It turned its head toward me, and that's when I heard the whisper, "Come play with me." I swung the bat, screamed, anything to break the paralysis that had rooted me to the spot. The figure didn't move. It just watched. Then in a blink, it vanished. I ran upstairs, locked all the doors and windows, and called my neighbor. She answered groggily, and I tried to explain, but she just told me to calm down, said the wind must have made me jumpy. I didn't sleep again that night. When morning came, the house seemed normal. The basement was empty. No footprints, no signs of anyone entering. Even the snow outside looked untouched. I wanted to believe it was over, that the night had been a fever dream, but I knew better. Over the next few years, I read about similar reports in nearby towns, figures in the snow, voices in empty houses, children's laughter echoing in basements on Christmas Eve. No one could explain it. No one could stop it. In 2007, I visited my old neighborhood. My parents' house was still there, though my mother had passed away years earlier. I went to the same street, the same driveway. As I parked, I saw it again, a figure in a dark coat standing in the road just like before. This time I didn't swerve. I watched it. The figure lifted its head and looked at me. Hollow eyes, pale face, mouth slightly open. It waved. And I realized, with a horror I cannot describe, that it wasn't waving to me. It was waving for me to join it. I left immediately, driving fast through the snowstorm, heart hammering, tears freezing on my cheeks. I never went back. Every Christmas Eve since, when the snow starts to fall, I hear scratching at the door, soft whispers from empty rooms, footsteps in the hallway. And sometimes, if I'm driving through a storm, I see that same figure standing in the middle of the road, waiting, watching, waving. I have learned not to stop, not to look, not to answer the knock, because if I do, I might never come back. And the thing I saw, that pale, hollow-faced figure, is still out there, somewhere in the snow, waiting for the next person foolish enough to travel alone on Christmas Eve. Story the end. The wind howled through the narrow streets of small-town Vermont that Christmas Eve, rattling windows and shaking the limbs of bare trees. The kind of storm that makes you double-check your locks and wish you'd left work early. I had been working the night shift at the local convenience store, the kind with one register, fluorescent lights that buzz endlessly, and a heating system that never quite worked. That night, the storm was supposed to keep everyone off the roads and heap earth, and I was counting on it. Around 10:30 p.m., the bell over the door rang, though I hadn't seen a car pass in over an hour. I looked up and saw a man standing in the doorway, shoulders hunched, coat dusted in snow. His eyes glinted under the hood, though the storm cut most of his features into shadow. I nodded and gestured for him to come inside. "Long drive?" I asked, trying to break the silence. He didn't answer immediately, just shuffled forward, boots leaving wet tracks across the tile floor. Then he spoke, low and deliberate. "Car broke down." I frowned. "Not much traffic tonight." He shrugged. The red of his coat caught the flickering fluorescent lights, unnatural in the gray interior. Red coat. Fur trim. For a moment, I laughed nervously. Santa, I thought, but this wasn't a joke. The jacket hung wrong, limp and grimy, fraying at the cuffs. "I need warmth," he said. I nodded toward the space by the counter. "Sit anywhere. Heater's working if you get close." He didn't sit, just stood there, breathing shallow, looking around the store like he was measuring it, inspecting it. I felt the first twinge of unease, a kind of gut warning that doesn't come from anything logical. "Need anything to drink? Coffee? Hot chocolate?" I asked. He shook his head. "No, just..." I wait. I felt my skin crawl. I wanted to ask what he meant, but the lights flickered then, and the buzzing from the heater amplified. I blamed the storm. I hoped it was just the storm. The silence stretched. The storm outside sounded like it was clawing at the walls. I tried to focus on my work, stocking the shelves, pretending not to notice the man. But every few seconds, my eyes flicked toward him. Every time he had shifted slightly, closer to the back door. My pulse quickened. I walked toward the counter, trying to keep a casual tone. "You need help getting somewhere?" He tilted his head, almost like a predatory animal. "No one helps. Not since." His voice trailed off. "Since when? Since where?" I opened my mouth to ask, but the sound of something scraping against the back door stopped me. Slow. Deliberate, like nails on wood. I froze. He smiled. Not the kind of smile you see at the holidays, the one that warms your chest. His was thin, tight, and stretched too wide across a face that seemed gray under the fluorescent lights. "I've waited many Christmases," he said. "Many, many nights." The scraping came again, louder. I walked slowly toward the door. "Who's there?" No answer. Just more scraping. The man in red reached out suddenly, hand cold as ice on my wrist. "Don't open," he whispered. "They come for me." "Who? What are you talking about?" I asked, heart hammering. He laughed then, low and dry. "They don't care for Christmas. They hunt, and I hide, every year." Before I could respond, the back door slammed open, the wind whipping snow across the floor. I stumbled back, and then I saw them. Figures in red coats, tattered, frozen-looking, faces pale and twisted. They moved slowly but with intent, surrounding the man. He flinched, bowed, almost bowed, and the figures closed in. I couldn't look away. "Run," he gasped, shoving me toward the front door. I did. I ran into the storm, snow burning my lungs, wind pushing me backward as if the storm itself were trying to keep me inside. I looked back once. The man, his face a mask of terror now, was surrounded, not fighting, not moving, just standing as the others leaned in. and then he was gone, disappeared into the swirling white. I stumbled to my car, engine barely turning over in the cold. I didn't stop until I reached the highway, until the lights of other cars and a gas station ahead felt like safety. But when I got there, the attendants told me something I couldn't believe. "Didn't you hear?" one of them asked. Two families tried to get through that storm last night. Their cars went off the road. Only one man made it here to the station, freezing, bleeding, said he'd seen something. Cops found nothing else, just tracks in the snow that led into the woods and disappeared. My stomach sank. "What man?" He shook his head. "Don't know. Some guy in a red coat. Weird thing is, the kids are still missing. Vanished." I drove home in silence, snow piling on my windshield. Every shadow along the highway looked like those figures, red coats moving slowly, waiting. I barely slept that night, and every Christmas Eve since, I've seen something in the snow, something standing upright, red coat, too wide a smile, always watching. The following years, I tried to forget. I moved south, avoided snow and small towns, but every Christmas Eve, I wake up before midnight, heart hammering, hearing scraping sounds against my windows, soft at first, then deliberate, as if someone is testing whether I remember. Last year, my nephew called me from the city. He had wandered out to see Christmas lights with his girlfriend and said he saw a man, red coat, frozen eyes, standing silently in a snow-dusted alley. He said the man didn't move, didn't speak, just stared. He thought it was a crazy person in a costume. But he sent me the photo anyway. A figure, partially hidden in shadows, unmistakably wearing red. I haven't gone out since then at Christmas Eve. I leave my lights off. I don't open the door if someone knocks. I make noise when I hear the scraping, trying to convince whatever it is that I'm awake, alert, that it can't touch me. I don't know why it survived that night in Vermont or why I did. I only know it comes every year. Patient, watching, waiting for the snow to cover the tracks, waiting for someone to step outside alone, and I know it's still out there. Because last night, I heard the scrape of boots across my driveway. Story the end. I didn't believe in evil tied to dates until Christmas Eve 2006. In a town so small, it barely showed up on maps. Pine Ridge, Colorado, sat against a stretch of forest locals avoided after dark, not because of superstition, but because too many things had gone wrong there over the years. I moved there after my divorce, thinking isolation would help. It didn't. I rented a single-story house on the edge of town. It used to belong to an older couple who died within months of each other. Heart attacks, people said. The realtor mentioned it casually, like it was a selling point that they hadn't died violently. The house was cheap, and I didn't ask questions. By December, snow buried everything. Pine Ridge emptied out after sunset. The grocery store closed at 6. The bar shut down early on Christmas Eve. Everyone went home, locked their doors, and stayed there. That should have been my first warning. On December 23rd, I noticed the footprints. They circled my house in the snow, stopping beneath each window. They were deep, heavy, like whoever made them had stood still for a long time. I assumed it was kids or maybe a drunk from town. Still, I brushed them away with a shovel and checked my locks twice that night. The next morning, Christmas Eve, the radio cut out while I was making coffee. Static swallowed the music. Then a man's voice came through, faint but clear. "Still time." I tapped the radio, thinking it was interference. The voice didn't repeat. The song resumed like nothing happened. That afternoon, I drove into town. People were tense. At the hardware store, 2 men whispered near the heaters. When I approached, they stopped talking. The cashier asked if I was staying home that night. "Yeah," I said. She nodded, relief crossing her face. "Good." On the way out, an old man standing near the door caught my sleeve. His eyes were cloudy, his hands shaking. "If you hear knocking," he said, "don't answer, even if it sounds like someone you know." I laughed awkwardly and pulled away, telling myself small towns loved stories. Fear passed like folklore. I wish I'd listened. That night, the snow started again. Thick, silent flakes. I made dinner, watched TV, tried to pretend Christmas was just another day. Around 8 p.m., the power flickered once, then held. The house creaked as it settled into the cold. At 9:14 p.m., there was a knock at the door. 3 slow raps. I froze on the couch. My heart hammered hard enough to hurt. I waited. The knock came again, same rhythm. I stood, peered through the peephole. No one was there. I stepped back, telling myself it was ice falling from the roof. Then the knock came again, harder this time. I shouted, asking who it was. A man answered from the other side of the door. "Mark," he said, "open up." My stomach dropped. My name wasn't common, and I hadn't told anyone in town yet. I asked how he knew me. Silence. Then his voice changed. Softer. Familiar. "Please," he said. "It's freezing." It sounded like my brother. My brother had been dead for 3 years. I backed away, shaking, as the knocking turned into pounding. The doorknob rattled violently. Something slammed against the door hard enough to make the frame groan. Then it stopped. I stood there for a full minute, listening. Nothing. No footsteps. No wind. I grabbed my phone and tried to call 911. No signal. I tried the landline. Dead. The lights flickered again. From the hallway, I heard footsteps. Slow. Heavy. Wet. I knew without looking that something was inside the house. I locked myself in the bedroom and shoved the dresser against the door. My breath came out in clouds. The house smelled wrong, like iron and rot. Something scratched along the door, nails dragging across wood. A voice whispered through the crack beneath it. "You didn't let me in." The scratching stopped. I heard movement, then the unmistakable sound of the crawlspace hatch opening in the ceiling above me. Dust fell onto the bed. Something dropped into the hallway with a thud. I didn't scream. I couldn't. The thing walked back and forth outside the bedroom, humming softly. A Christmas song. Off key. Slow. Each step made the floorboards creak like they might snap. Then it knocked on the bedroom door. 3 times. "Still time," it said. The door shook as it slammed into it again and again. The dresser shifted. Wood splintered. I grabbed the only weapon I had, a metal lamp, and held it like it mattered. The door burst inward. It was tall. Too tall to stand upright in the hallway. Its limbs bent wrong, joints popping as it moved. Its face looked almost human, stretched thin, skin pulled tight over bone. Its mouth split into a smile that didn't stop at the edges of its face. Its eyes were black and wet and empty. "You should have stayed away," it said in my brother's voice. I swung the lamp. It connected with its head. The sound was wrong, like hitting damp wood. It laughed and grabbed me, its hands ice cold and impossibly strong. Pain exploded in my shoulder as it threw me against the wall. I blacked out. I woke up outside, half buried in snow, my house burning behind me. Flames licked the sky, crackling loudly in the silent night. The thing stood near the fire, watching, its shape flickering in the light. As sirens wailed in the distance, it stepped back into the trees and vanished. The firefighters said a gas leak caused the explosion. They said I was lucky to survive. They said shock explained my story. But the town didn't look surprised. I left Pine Ridge the next day with nothing but the clothes I was wearing. I thought distance would save me. It didn't. Every Christmas since, something finds me. In 2009, it was knocking on my apartment door in Kansas, using my mother's voice. In 2012, it stood outside my motel window in Arizona, smiling through the glass. In 2017, I woke to find muddy footprints circling my car in Oregon, stopping beneath every door. It never comes inside again. It doesn't need to, because now I know it's waiting for the night I finally answer, waiting for the moment I get tired, lonely, or weak enough to open the door. It follows Christmas the way a shadow follows light, and every year, no matter where I am, no matter how careful I am, I hear the same thing just before midnight. 3 slow knocks, and a voice that knows my name. Story the end. On Christmas Eve of 1994, the temperature in northern Wisconsin dropped so fast the inside of my nose burned when I breathed. I remember that detail because my truck had no heat, and I kept rubbing my face with my sleeve, trying to stay awake as I drove the last stretch of county highway toward my parents' farmhouse. I was 23, working nights at a paper mill, and Christmas Eve was the only night I'd been granted off in weeks. The radio kept fading in and out, alternating between static and scratchy carols. The road was empty, just a ribbon of black asphalt cutting through endless white fields and dark tree lines. Snow hadn't started yet, but the sky was heavy with it, low and gray, like it was waiting for permission to fall. About 3 miles from my parents' place, I saw a set of taillights ahead of me. A station wagon, old and boxy, pulled partly onto the shoulder. Hazard lights blinked weakly. I slowed down. Out here, that usually meant trouble. Frozen fuel lines, blown tires, dead batteries. People helped each other on these roads, or at least they used to. A woman stood beside the car, waving. She looked bundled in a long coat, scarf pulled up over her mouth. I hesitated, thinking about how late it was, how empty the road felt. Then guilt crept in. It was Christmas Eve. Leaving someone stranded in the cold felt unforgivable. I pulled over behind her and stepped out. The cold hit like a slap. "Everything okay?" I asked. She shook her head. "Car died. Won't turn over. I think the alternator's shot." Her voice was tired, strained. She looked to be in her 40s, maybe older, with tired eyes and hair tucked into her coat. I offered to try a jump, though I doubted it would help. As I popped my hood, I noticed something odd. The back windows of her station wagon were covered from the inside, blocked by some kind of dark material. Not frost. Something solid. "Traveling far?" I asked as we hooked up the cables. "Just heading home," she said. "Should have left earlier." The jump didn't work. The engine made a weak, grinding sound, then nothing. "I've got a phone," I said. "Reception's spotty, but we can try." Her eyes flicked toward the tree line. "I already tried. No signal." I checked anyway. She was right. Nothing. "My folks live a mile up the road," I said. "You can wait there. Warm up. Call for help." She hesitated for just a second, then nodded. "I'd appreciate that." She locked her car before following me, testing the door twice. That should have been my second warning. The first was the covered windows. The third came later. We drove slowly, her station wagon abandoned on the shoulder, hazard lights still blinking like a warning flare. She followed in my truck, sitting stiffly in the passenger seat, hands folded tight in her lap. She didn't look around much. She didn't ask questions. She just stared straight ahead. When we reached my parents' farmhouse, every window was dark. "That's strange," I muttered. "They should be home." I parked anyway and led her up to the porch. I knocked. No answer. I tried the door. Locked. "They might have gone to midnight service early," I said, "or maybe they lost power." She stood behind me, close enough that I could feel her breath through her scarf. "Can we go inside?" she asked. "I don't have a key," I said, "but there's a neighbor half a mile down, or we can wait in the truck." Her hand touched my arm. "Please, I'm freezing." Something in her voice shifted. Not fear. Expectation. That's when the porch light snapped on. I jumped. The light flooded the porch, harsh and white. My father stood in the doorway, shotgun in his hands. "Get away from him," he shouted. The woman moved fast. Her hand came out of her coat, holding a knife, long and narrow. She lunged for me, but my father fired into the air, the blast deafening in the cold night. She screamed and stumbled back, slipping on the icy porch steps and falling hard onto the snow. She scrambled to her feet and ran, disappearing into the darkness toward the road. My father dragged me inside and locked the door, bolting it. My mother was crying, clutching the phone. "She followed me home," my father said, voice shaking. "Been sitting out there since before dark." The police came an hour later. They found the station wagon still on the shoulder. Inside, they found rope, duct tape, trash bags, and a notebook filled with addresses. Some were circled, some crossed out. Several were within 10 miles of our farmhouse. The woman was never found. For years, that story lived in my head like an unresolved nightmare. Life moved on. I got married, had kids, moved south. Every Christmas Eve, though, I thought about her eyes, the way they'd looked past me, already certain of something. I tried to convince myself it was a one-time thing, a freak encounter. Then, in 2012, my cousin Mark disappeared. Mark was a volunteer firefighter in a small town in Minnesota. On Christmas Day, he was called out to help with a vehicle stuck off a rural road. A woman had called it in, said her car slid into a ditch. By the time backup arrived, Mark and his truck were gone. They found his vehicle 2 days later, abandoned near a frozen lake. No signs of a struggle, no footprints. Just his radio, smashed on the ground. The case went cold. At Mark's funeral, an older state trooper pulled me aside. He asked if I'd ever heard about an incident back in Wisconsin in the mid-90s involving a woman targeting people on Christmas Eve. I told him about what happened to me. He nodded slowly. "We think it's the same person. Or maybe a couple working together. They move. They wait years between attempts." "Why Christmas?" I asked. "People help," he said. "They open doors they wouldn't open any other night." In 2019, the truth finally surfaced. A man was arrested in Michigan after a traffic stop turned up human remains buried under snowmobiles in his garage. His wife had died the year before. When police searched old storage units, they found belongings linked to at least 9 missing people across 3 states. Several disappearances occurred on or around Christmas. Photos, IDs, jewelry, a notebook filled with names and dates. One entry stopped investigators cold. December 24th, 1994. A farmhouse address in northern Wisconsin. Written next to it was a single word. Interrupted. The woman's body was never found. Police believe she died years earlier, possibly buried somewhere remote, her remains lost to time and snow. I still think about her every Christmas Eve. About how close I came to becoming another crossed-out name. About how easily kindness can be used as a weapon. I don't stop for stranded cars anymore. I don't answer the door late at night. My kids think I'm paranoid. I let them, because somewhere out there are stories no one tells at Christmas. Stories that only survive because someone interrupted them. And some nights, when the snow falls just right and the world goes quiet, I swear I can still see hazard lights blinking on the side of a dark road, waiting for someone kind enough to stop. Story the end. I was 42 years old when I finally told my wife what happened that Christmas. I'd spent more than 2 decades pretending it was just a bad memory, something distorted by fear and time. But the truth never softened. It stayed sharp, jagged, and heavy, like something buried shallow that frost keeps pushing back to the surface. In December of 1999, I was a volunteer firefighter in a small town in eastern Kentucky, the kind of town where everyone knows your truck, your dog, and your business. Christmas was a big deal there. Lights on every porch, paper angels taped to windows, church bells ringing even when nobody showed up for services. That year, winter came early and hard. Ice storms knocked trees onto power lines and snow followed, thick and relentless. On Christmas Eve, I was on call. My wife and kids were at her parents' house 2 towns over, and I planned to join them once my shift ended. Around 8:30 p.m., the pager went off. A single call. Welfare check. Old farmhouse outside town. Elderly couple hadn't been seen in days. Power out in that area. I drove the engine alone. That wasn't unusual. Calls like this usually turned out to be nothing, folks sleeping through outages or staying with relatives. The farmhouse sat at the end of a long dirt road, surrounded by woods on 3 sides. Snow covered everything in a clean, quiet blanket that swallowed sound. The house was dark when I pulled up. No porch light, no smoke from the chimney. I knocked hard and announced myself. No answer. I tried the door. It creaked open. The smell hit me first. It wasn't rot. Not yet. It was something metallic and sweet, mixed with cold air and old wood. My flashlight beam cut through the darkness, landing on the living room. Christmas decorations were still up. A tree stood in the corner, lights dark, ornaments crooked as if someone had brushed past them in a hurry. I called out again. Silence. I moved room to room, boots crunching on ice tracked in from somewhere. The kitchen was a mess. Plates shattered on the floor. A pot on the stove was burned black, long cold. Something dark streaked the linoleum, smeared as if dragged by hand. I found the husband in the bedroom. He was seated upright in a chair facing the door, hands folded neatly in his lap. His eyes were open. His throat had been cut so deeply his head lolled forward unnaturally. Blood soaked his shirt, dried stiff. He looked posed, deliberate. My radio crackled as I called it in, voice shaking despite years of training. While waiting for backup, I covered him with a blanket. That's when I noticed the footprints. Bare feet. They led from the bedroom toward the hallway. Small, too small to be his, or his wife's. I followed them. The bathroom was empty. The spare bedroom was empty. The footprints continued down the hall and into the basement. I should have waited. I know that now. But at the time, all I could think was that someone might still be alive down there. The basement stairs were steep and narrow. The smell grew worse with every step. My flashlight flickered. At the bottom, the beam landed on Christmas decorations stacked neatly along the wall. Boxes labeled in careful handwriting. Lights. Ornaments. Nativity. Then I saw her. The wife lay on the concrete floor naked, her body arranged in a way that made my stomach turn. Her skin was pale, lips blue. Her eyes were missing. In their place were 2 red glass Christmas ornaments shoved into the sockets. Blood pooled beneath her head, frozen at the edges. Carved into her chest, deep and uneven, were the words, "Joy to the world." I stumbled back, gagging, my boots slipping in blood. That's when I heard breathing. Not mine. It came from behind the furnace. Slow, controlled. I raised my flashlight and gun at the same time. "Sheriff's Department," I shouted, though it wasn't true. "Come out now!" The breathing stopped. Then a voice spoke, soft, cheerful. "Don't ruin Christmas." He stepped into the light. He was thin, pale, completely naked except for a Santa hat perched on his head. His feet were blue with cold. His body was covered in cuts, some fresh, some healed. His eyes were wide and bright, almost joyful. I froze. He smiled. "They didn't appreciate it," he said. "All the work I did." He lunged. I fired. The shot went wild, ricocheting off the concrete. He slammed into me, knocking me backward. The gun skittered across the floor. His hands were cold, impossibly strong, fingers digging into my throat. I smelled blood and pine and something rotten on his breath. "I make them beautiful," he whispered, "like presents." I managed to knee him hard enough to break free. I scrambled for the stairs, slipping, clawing at the steps. He laughed as he followed, not rushing, just enjoying it. I reached the top and slammed the basement door, throwing my weight against it. He pounded on the other side, once, twice, then stopped. Silence. Backup arrived minutes later. The sheriff, 2 deputies. They searched the house, the woods, the surrounding fields. They never found him. They said maybe he escaped through a storm cellar. Maybe I imagined parts of it. Trauma can do that, they told me. The official report listed the deaths as a homicide-suicide. Suspect unknown. Case went cold. 2 days later, after Christmas, a call came in from the next county over. Another farmhouse. Elderly woman missing. Husband found dead, throat cut, Christmas decorations disturbed. On her body, carved into her skin, were the words, "Peace on Earth." They caught him in January. Or rather, they caught someone. A drifter. Mentally ill. Confessed under pressure. Knew details he could have read in the paper. He didn't have scars. Didn't have the Santa hat. Didn't have the eyes I saw. He died in prison 3 years later. Every Christmas since, I hear that breathing in my dreams. I see the ornaments where eyes should be. I smell pine and blood. Last year, a news article caught my eye. Another rural town, another elderly couple, another holiday. The words carved this time were, "Merry Christmas." I don't volunteer anymore. I don't sleep well in December. And every Christmas Eve, just before midnight, I check my basement door to make sure it's locked. Because some things don't stop celebrating. Story the end. I was 17, the Christmas it happened, old enough to understand something was wrong, but still young enough to believe adults when they said everything would be fine. That belief died on December 25th, 2004, in a stretch of rural New Mexico, where the desert turns bitterly cold at night, and silence feels like something alive. My family lived just outside a small town you wouldn't find on most maps. 1 grocery store, 1 sheriff, 1 church. My dad worked nights at a copper processing plant an hour away. My mom stayed home with me and my little brother, Lucas, who was 9. Christmas was the only time Dad managed to take off a few days in a row, so we treated it like a sacred event. Decorations went up early. Cookies were baked in bulk. We even splurged on a real tree that year, hauling it home, tied to the roof of our old Ford. The week before Christmas, a man went missing. His name was Frank Molina. He lived alone on a ranch a few miles from us. People said he kept to himself, that he was strange but harmless. The sheriff knocked on our door asking if we'd seen anything unusual. My mom said no. Dad said probably coyotes or an accident out on the land. They found Frank's truck abandoned on Christmas Eve, parked crookedly near the edge of the highway. The driver's door was open. The engine was still warm. There was blood on the steering wheel. The sheriff told everyone to stay inside after dark. Christmas morning came anyway, like it always does, pretending nothing is wrong. Lucas tore through his presents, laughing and shouting. Dad drank coffee and smiled more than he usually did. Mom tried to keep things normal, humming along with the radio. Outside, the sky was painfully clear, the kind of blue that makes the cold feel sharper. Around noon, the power went out. That wasn't unusual out there, but this time it didn't come back. The radio died. The phone line was dead. Dad cursed and went outside to check the breaker box. When he came back in, his face was tight. "Something's not right," he said. "Tracks all over the yard." "What kind of tracks?" Mom asked. Dad hesitated. "Bare feet." Lucas laughed, thinking it was a joke. Dad didn't smile. We spent the afternoon clustered in the living room, the fireplace crackling, shadows dancing on the walls. As the sun went down, the desert cold seeped into the house, creeping under doors and through window frames. That's when we heard the knocking. 3 knocks. Slow. Deliberate. Dad stood up immediately. "Stay here," he said. He grabbed the shotgun from above the door and approached the front slowly. "Who is it?" he called. No answer. Another knock. Louder this time. Dad cracked the door open just enough to see outside. I watched from the hallway. There was a man standing on the porch, barefoot in the dirt, wearing only jeans and a filthy white t-shirt despite the cold. His feet were blackened and bleeding. His skin looked gray, stretched too tight over his bones. "Help me," the man said. His voice was hoarse, raw. "Please. They're coming." Dad didn't lower the gun. "Who's coming?" The man smiled. "Christmas," he said. Then he collapsed forward. Dad dragged him inside, despite Mom's protests. The man weighed almost nothing. His body felt wrong, too light, like a shell. He was shivering violently, teeth chattering so hard it sounded like bone hitting bone. Mom wrapped him in blankets while Dad tried the phone again. Still dead. "What happened to you?" Mom asked the man gently. "They took him," the man whispered. "Frank, he didn't sing." Lucas looked confused. "Sing what?" The man's eyes snapped open, locking onto Lucas with terrifying intensity. "Carols," he hissed. "They don't like silence." The lights flickered. Then every bulb in the house burst at once, plunging us into darkness. The man screamed. It wasn't a normal scream. It went on too long, rising and falling like laughter and agony tangled together. Dad raised the shotgun again, shouting for him to calm down. The man sat straight up, blankets sliding off his body, his mouth stretched impossibly wide, jaw cracking. Blood poured from his lips as he began to sing. "Silent night, holy night." The sound made my ears ring. It felt like pressure inside my skull. Lucas started crying, covering his ears. The fireplace flared violently, sparks flying into the room. Dad fired. The blast echoed through the house. The man jerked back, a hole torn through his chest. He fell still. For a moment there was only the sound of crackling fire and our own breathing. Then the man started laughing. His chest moved, knitting itself together slowly, wetly. He stood, bones popping, skin shifting. His eyes rolled back, showing nothing but white. "They're here," he said. There was a pounding on the walls, not at the doors. Everywhere, like fists hitting wood from all sides. The windows rattled violently. Shadows moved past the glass, tall and thin and wrong, stretching and shrinking like living smoke. Dad fired again and again, but the man lunged forward, knocking him aside. He grabbed Mom by the hair and slammed her into the wall. I ran toward Lucas, pulling him behind the couch as glass shattered around us. The man turned toward us, blood running down his face, smiling wider than any human should. "You didn't decorate enough," he said. Something crashed through the window. I didn't see it clearly. None of us did. It was too fast, too dark. But I remember antlers scraping against the ceiling, hooves cracking tile, the smell of rot and pine and iron flooding the room. Dad screamed. Mom screamed. Lucas screamed. The thing moved through the house like a storm. I hid under the kitchen table, hands clamped over my mouth, watching feet and legs and shadows pass by. I heard tearing sounds, wet sounds, crunching. At some point, the screaming stopped. Silence returned, thick and heavy. I stayed hidden until my muscles ached and my throat burned from holding my breath. When I finally crawled out, the house was destroyed. Furniture overturned. Blood everywhere. The Christmas tree lay snapped in half, ornaments shattered like red glass eyes on the floor. Mom and Dad were gone. So was Lucas. The man in the t-shirt was gone too. The front door stood open, swinging gently in the cold wind. Outside, the yard was covered in footprints, bare human feet mixed with something far larger, something with hooves. I ran. I ran until my lungs felt like they were on fire. I didn't stop until I reached the neighbor's house miles away, collapsing on their porch. The sheriff came, then state police, then people who didn't introduce themselves. They found blood, they found destruction, they didn't find bodies, they told me it was an animal attack. That trauma made me imagine the rest. Frank Molina's body was never found. Neither were my parents, neither was Lucas. Every Christmas since, there are disappearances out there. Rural homes, isolated families. The cases get buried under snow and paperwork and excuses. Sometimes when the wind is just right, I hear singing outside my window. Soft at first, almost gentle. I don't decorate anymore. I don't play music. I sit in silence and pray that's enough. Because whatever comes for Christmas doesn't like to be ignored, but it hates being watched. Story the end. Christmas was never loud where I grew up. That's something people from cities don't understand. In rural northern Maine, winter swallows sound. Snow packs itself into every gap, trees stand frozen, and even your own footsteps feel like they don't belong. In 2009, I was 39 years old, divorced and working as a county road supervisor. Plows, salt trucks, emergency access. If a road needed clearing, my phone rang. Christmas week was always busy. That year, it became unforgettable in a way I still struggle to explain without my hands shaking. It started December 18th when I got a call about an abandoned plow truck. One of my drivers, Evan Mercer, didn't show up for his 5 a.m. shift. That wasn't like him. Evan was early for everything. When his radio didn't respond, I drove out to his route myself. His truck was parked on the shoulder of Old Birch Road, engine cold, keys still in the ignition. The plow blade was lowered like he'd stopped mid-job. Footprints led from the driver's door into the woods. They were barefoot. It was 10 degrees outside. I called it in, expecting a search and rescue situation. State police came, dogs were brought out. The trail went about 60 yards into the trees and stopped abruptly as if Evan had vanished. No signs of a struggle, no blood, no clothing, just snow and silence. They officially listed him as missing. That night, Evan's wife called me. She asked if I'd found him yet. I told her no, and she started crying softly, saying he'd been acting strange all week. She said he'd come home late one night with frost on his jacket and told her, completely serious, that he'd seen a Christmas tree deep in the woods lit up and humming like electricity, even though there were no power lines for miles. She thought he was joking. I didn't. On December 20th, another truck didn't come back. This time it was Raymond Collins, 58, close to retirement. His plow was found idling on a closed logging road, snow drifting over the tires. Same thing. Keys in the ignition, driver's door open, bare footprints leading into the woods. Same distance, same stopping point. The state police started asking questions they didn't like answering out loud. Hypothermia-induced delirium, shared hallucinations. Maybe someone was messing with the trucks, but nothing added up. That evening, I went to check my own equipment yard before heading home. It was dark, floodlights reflecting off snowbanks taller than my truck. As I walked past the storage shed, I noticed something new near the fence. A Christmas wreath. It was tied neatly to the chain link with red ribbon. Fresh pine, still green, no snow on it. Hanging from the center was a small laminated photo. It was Evan. I took it down and brought it to the sheriff. He stared at it for a long time and then asked me, very quietly, if I believed in coincidences. I told him I used to. The next morning, December 22nd, a volunteer firefighter named Mark Jensen was found dead. He hadn't gone missing. He was found sitting upright in the driver's seat of his pickup, parked in his own driveway. The truck was off. The doors were locked from the inside. He was barefoot, hands folded neatly in his lap. He had frozen to death. Behind his house, in the tree line, was a Christmas tree. A real one. Cut clean at the base, decorated with battery-powered lights and photographs, dozens of them, all local men, plow drivers, firefighters, utility workers. Every photo had a date written on the back in red marker. The most recent date was December 22nd. Marks. The tree was gone by the time we went back the next day. Christmas Eve came with heavy snow and a power outage that hit half the county. Crews were stretched thin. I stayed in my office overnight coordinating plows and emergency access. Around 1 a.m., I heard singing. At first, I thought it was the radio in another room, but it wasn't coming from the building. It was outside, faint, slow, and off-key. Silent night. I stepped out into the snow, heart pounding. The yard was empty. No cars, no footprints except mine. The singing stopped the moment I opened the door. When I went back inside, there was a gift on my desk. Brown paper, red twine. No one else had keys. Inside was a pair of work boots. My boots, still muddy, still scuffed exactly the way I'd left them by my door at home. I didn't sleep after that. On Christmas morning, 3 more men were found. All essential workers, all barefoot, all frozen, all within a mile of wooded areas. The governor declared a state of emergency. News vans arrived. People were told to stay indoors. Crews worked in pairs. No one went out alone. That night, Christmas night, my radio crackled with a call I'll never forget. There's something wrong at the old ranger station. That building had been abandoned since the 80s. No power, no heat. We found every missing man there. Evan, Raymond. Others I hadn't even known were missing yet. They were seated in folding chairs arranged in a wide circle around a massive Christmas tree that scraped the ceiling. The tree was alive, sap still sticky, lights glowing without any visible power source. The air inside was brutally cold, yet none of the windows were broken. All the men were barefoot. All were dead. Pinned to the tree were hundreds of photographs, generations of workers, old black and white images of snow crews from the 1940s, men standing proudly beside plows pulled by horses, names written in careful script, dates, Christmases. On the wall behind the tree was a message written in red, "They keep the roads open so he can come through." At the base of the tree was one final photograph. Me, taken that night, standing in the doorway. I ran. I don't remember how I got home. I remember locking every door, turning the heat as high as it would go, and sitting on my couch with my coat still on. At midnight, the power went out. The house went silent. Then the singing started. Right outside my front door. Slow footsteps circled the house, bare feet crunching softly in snow. Shadows passed the windows. I smelled pine. Cold air seeped through the walls like breath. Someone knocked, once, twice. Then a voice, calm and patient, spoke my name. I didn't answer. I sat there shaking until dawn. When the sun rose, the footprints were gone. The snow was untouched. The power came back. On my porch was a Christmas wreath. Inside it was a photo of me asleep on my couch. I resigned 2 weeks later, moved south, changed jobs, changed routines, tried to forget. But every December, when the snow falls heavy and the world goes quiet, I hear singing in the distance. And every Christmas Eve, without fail, a wreath appears somewhere near my home. Always with a photo, always dated next year. Story the end. I was 23 and working my first Christmas alone at the small gas station just outside of Bloomington, Indiana. The town was quiet that year. Snow covering the streets, the fluorescent lights of the station cutting through the darkness like beacons in the endless white. My parents had gone to visit my sister in Chicago, and I had stayed behind because I needed the money. I never imagined that night would become something I'd never forget, something I would carry with me long after the snow melted. It started around 10 o'clock when the last car drove away and I was restocking the shelves. The heater rattled, but the station was warm enough. That's when I first noticed him, standing outside in the snow. A man, tall, thin, dressed in a red coat that was too bright for the dark street. He wasn't moving, just staring at me through the glass. I waved. No reaction. I called out, but the wind carried my voice away. After a few minutes, he started walking toward the door. I felt a prickle of unease. Something about the way he moved, slow, deliberate, almost unnatural, made my stomach tighten. When he reached the door, I unlocked it and tried to greet him casually, but he didn't answer. He just stepped inside and stood under the harsh fluorescent light, smiling. "Can I help you?" I asked. He didn't say anything. He just stared, tilting his head as if trying to memorize every detail of the store. I tried to ignore him, handed him a map of the state when he wandered toward the counter, but he didn't take it. He just moved toward the back, toward the storage room where I kept the back office and the supplies. "Sir, you can't go back there," I said, trying to sound firm. He stopped and looked at me, that smile widening just a fraction. He didn't speak, just kept moving. I grabbed the bat behind the counter, something I always kept there for strays or drunk drivers, and stepped toward him. He didn't flinch. That's when I noticed the blood. Not dripping or fresh, but smeared along his coat, dark red against the bright fabric, glinting in the fluorescent light. I froze, my grip tightening on the bat. "You shouldn't be here," I said. He tilted his head again, then walked slowly toward the back door. I followed, trying to block his path. That's when I heard the first scream. It came from the alley behind the station, high-pitched, wet, desperate. I recognized it immediately as human. My heart sank. He stopped and turned toward the sound, as if listening. Then he smiled at me. That smile was the thing that finally made my stomach drop out of my chest. It wasn't a normal smile. It was wide, stretched too far, and somehow wrong. Before I could react, he bolted toward the alley. I ran after him, bat in hand, but the snow slowed me down. By the time I reached the alley, there was nothing but footprints leading away from the street, deeper into the darkness between the buildings. No sign of a person. Just blood on the snow, smeared and dragged as if someone or something had been pulled along the ground. I ran back inside, slamming the door behind me and locking it. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely dial 911. The line was dead. Every line in the station was dead. The lights flickered violently, then went out, leaving the place bathed only in the red glow of the emergency exit sign. Then I heard the footsteps, not outside, not above, inside. Slow, dragging, deliberate. I hid behind the counter hand, listening. The footsteps stopped at the storage room door. Then I heard a low rasp. "I brought something for you." The door creaked open. I swung the bat, connecting with something soft. A thud, a grunt, then silence. I dared a peek. There was no one there, but the supplies in the storage room had been thrown across the floor. Boxes torn open, something wet and sticky glistening in the red emergency light. Blood, a lot of it. I backed away, my mind racing. The front door rattled, then it slammed. Hard, like someone had thrown themselves into it. I grabbed my coat and keys, determined to run, but the car wouldn't start. Dead battery. Tires buried in snow. I was trapped. That's when I heard it. Laughing. Low, wet, guttural. Coming from everywhere and nowhere. The red-coated man was back inside. I could hear him moving, shuffling, humming Christmas carols softly, impossibly off-key, the melody twisted, wrong. I tried to stay calm, to think. I remembered the security camera in the corner of the store. Maybe I could record him, maybe someone would see, maybe he'd leave. I lifted the camera, trying to angle it, but the feed was static. The snowstorm outside, the emergency lights, some kind of interference, I don't know. He appeared behind me, suddenly, impossibly fast. His hands were cold, wet, coated in something sticky, and he grabbed my shoulder. I swung the bat, connected with his head. He staggered back. I ran for the office door, locked it, and sat trembling, listening as he moved through the store. Hours passed, maybe minutes. I don't know. The radio in the office started playing softly. A Christmas song, tinny, distorted. Then a voice overlaid it, whispering my name, whispering Lucas, whispering my mother's name. The lights flickered back on briefly, and I saw him, standing near the front door. Only, he wasn't alone. In the reflection of the glass doors, I saw other figures. Pale, thin, faceless, moving slowly, dragging something heavy behind them, something that looked like human. I screamed, ran to the back door, and tried to force it open. It wouldn't budge. Behind me, the red coat shuffled closer. "Don't leave," he said softly. "Not yet." Then I felt it. A hand on my leg. Not human. Long, thin fingers digging into my flesh through my jeans. I kicked, screamed, and finally managed to wrench free, bursting out into the snow. The yard was empty, silent, except for the tracks, bare footprints leading toward the woods behind the station. Blood in the snow. Something heavy dragged through it. I ran to the main road and didn't stop until I reached a house with lights. A neighbor took me in, called the police. When they came, the station was empty. No footprints except my own. No red coat, no blood, no bodies. Nothing. They said maybe it was a prank, maybe my mind was playing tricks, or maybe the storm had caused hallucinations. Frankly, I don't care what they said. I know what I saw. I know what I heard. The next year, another town, another small business, same snowstorm, same reports. Red coat, barefoot, blood, people missing. Some say it's just urban legend, but I know better. I know the sound of those soft, off-key carols, the way the emergency lights glow red on the snow, the smell of wet pine and iron in the air. I quit working nights. I quit going out alone. I don't stay in small towns at Christmas anymore. And every year when the snow starts falling and the wind howls around buildings, I can't help but wonder, how many people won't make it home this year? How many will hear the knock at the door and see the red coat before it's too late? I never went back to that gas station. The building burned down 2 winters later, 'cause unknown. Some say it was electrical. Some say the storm did it. I don't know. I don't want to. I just remember the cold, the blood, the smile, and the sound of carols that didn't belong to any human voice. I never decorate my house for Christmas. I don't play music. I don't go out alone because somewhere out there, in the snow, it's waiting, watching, choosing. Story the end. It was Christmas Eve, 2007, in a small town outside Minneapolis, Minnesota. The kind of town where everyone knows everyone else, where the snow piles high along the streets and the wind cuts through your coat like a knife. I was 32, working as a night security guard for a local warehouse that stored holiday shipments for small businesses across the state. I'd always hated Christmas. Too much noise, too much expectation. But that year, it became something I would never forget, and something I still wake up thinking about when the wind howls outside my window. The first sign that something was wrong came on December 18th. I was making my rounds, flashlight cutting through the dark, when I noticed a small figure standing outside the warehouse near the loading dock. At first, I thought it was a kid playing hooky from school, but as I approached, the figure didn't move. It was a man, old, maybe in his 60s, wearing a Santa suit that was faded and dirty, the white trim gray and matted. His hat drooped over his eyes, and he didn't respond when I called out. I radioed it into my supervisor, but when a backup security guard arrived 10 minutes later, the man was gone. No footprints in the snow. Nothing. Just the faint scent of pine lingering in the air. I shrugged it off. Maybe he'd been a homeless man looking for shelter, but something about the way he stood there, too still, too deliberate, felt wrong. On December 20th, one of the warehouse employees, a guy named Tom, didn't show up for his night shift. We called his house. No answer. I drove to his apartment, snow crunching under the tires, and found the door unlocked. Inside, the apartment was warm, the heat on, the TV playing some cheesy Christmas special. Tom was sitting at the kitchen table, eyes wide open, staring straight ahead, hands folded in front of him. He was dead. Heart attack, the coroner later said. What disturbed me more than his sudden death was the scene around him. The table had 2 place settings, 2 cups of coffee, still warm. Across from Tom sat a small wrapped gift, brown paper tied with red string, no tag. Someone had placed it there. Tom had lived alone. I reported it, but the authorities chalked it up to natural causes. I wanted to believe that. I really did. December 22nd brought the second incident. Mary Carlson, an elderly widow who lived 2 blocks from my apartment, was found dead in her living room. Hypothermia, the coroner said. The heat had been turned off at the breaker box. There were no signs of forced entry, no fingerprints. Her house was immaculate, decorated from floor to ceiling for Christmas. The tree glowed with lights that didn't seem to have any cords connected. Every ornament was replaced with a photograph. Family, friends, strangers. Dates written in red ink covered the backs. Some dates were recent, others went back decades. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about the Santa figure, about Tom and Mary, about how perfectly these deaths were staged. At 3 a.m., I woke to the sound of faint music. Caroling, slow and off-key, coming from outside my window. I swore I could see shadows moving among the snowbanks. I turned on every light, locked every door, and stayed awake until dawn. December 23rd, the pattern continued. The Thompson family, 4 people, were found dead in their home, frozen, arranged neatly around their Christmas tree, which was decorated entirely with photographs of neighbors and local residents. On the wall behind the tree, scrawled in red ink, were the words, "We're all family now." By Christmas Eve, the town was on edge. Local authorities urged everyone to stay indoors. No one drove alone, and the schools and stores were closed. I volunteered to patrol the streets in my truck, flashlight sweeping across snow-laden yards and empty streets. Around 10 p.m., I noticed something strange near the old church on Main Street. A Christmas tree had appeared overnight, huge, decorated with dozens of photographs, lights glowing bright despite the lack of power. I approached cautiously. The pictures were of people from town, some alive, some already dead. At the base of the tree was a small wrapped gift, identical to the ones left for Tom and Mary. I didn't touch it. I ran back to my truck, heart pounding, and radioed for backup. By the time the sheriff arrived, the tree and the gift were gone. No footprints in the snow, no signs of disturbance, nothing. At midnight, I was driving past my apartment when I saw him. The Santa figure. Standing in the middle of the street, hands at his sides, motionless. I stopped, froze. He tilted his head slowly, as if acknowledging me. I tried to get out of the truck, but the door wouldn't open. Just as I started to panic, the figure turned and walked into the shadows, vanishing completely. The rest of the night was a blur. I stayed in my truck, engine running, lights on full, until dawn. When I got home, a brown paper package was on my doorstep. No tag, no return address. Inside was a photograph. Me sitting on my couch, taken from the street, time-stamped a few minutes earlier. I didn't sleep again. The following day, Christmas morning, my phone rang. It was the dispatcher. Another death. A local family, the Millers, found frozen in their living room, arranged around a Christmas tree decorated with photographs. Their house was untouched by the outside cold. Heat on, doors locked, everything in place. On the wall behind the tree, written in red ink, were the words, "He watches when it's warm." I left town that afternoon, packed a bag and drove south, didn't look back. The authorities never found a cause. Some people whispered about a cult, others about a serial killer. But the pattern didn't match anything they knew. The town emptied out over the next week, people moving to relatives or hotels, refusing to spend another night in their homes. Years later, I still get the packages. Every December 23rd or 24th, a brown paper package appears somewhere near my apartment, never opened, never inspected, always a photograph inside. Sometimes of me, sometimes of strangers I don't know, but always time-stamped within minutes of when I receive it. I don't leave the house on Christmas Eve. I don't decorate. I don't celebrate because I know he's still out there, watching, waiting. And every year I hear the faint sound of off-key caroling outside my window, like a shadow moving just beyond the light, just out of reach. And I know that come next Christmas, the photographs will keep coming. Story the end. It was Christmas Eve, 2011, and I was driving through rural Pennsylvania, somewhere between Lancaster and Reading, trying to get home before the roads iced over completely. Snow had been falling all day, thick and silent, covering every field and forest like a blanket, muffling the world. I was a courier at the time, delivering parcels for a small company that specialized in overnight Christmas deliveries. My route had taken me farther out than usual, and I was tired, eyes burning from the reflection of headlights off fresh snow. I turned off the highway onto a narrow, unplowed road when I saw the house. It was the kind of old farmhouse that looks like it's always been abandoned, with peeling white paint and shutters hanging crookedly, but a single porch light was on, warm and yellow, and smoke curled from the chimney. A wooden sign hung crooked on the gate. Merry Christmas. I should have kept driving. I really should have, but the GPS on my phone glitched, and it showed my next delivery as being here. No house number, just coordinates that placed me in the middle of a field. I parked on the side of the road and trudged through the snow to the front porch. That's when I noticed something odd. Footprints. They led from the road to the porch, heavy, deep, and wide apart, like someone had been wearing work boots. But they weren't human-sized. Not exactly. I knocked. Silence. I knocked again. The door creaked open slightly on its own. I froze. "Hello?" I said. No answer. Just the smell. The air inside was warm, but smelled wrong, like metal and rot mixed with the scent of pine. I stepped in anyway. The floorboards groaned under my weight. The living room was decorated for Christmas, like someone had spent days getting it perfect. A tree stood in the corner, heavily adorned, presents neatly stacked underneath. Everything was dusted with snow, as if the ornaments themselves had been outside recently. Then I heard it. From the kitchen, a low, wet breathing. I aimed my flashlight toward the sound. The beam caught movement, something crouched near the counter. At first I thought it was an animal, a cat or dog maybe, but then it stood, too tall, too thin, limbs bent at odd angles, its head tilted almost unnaturally to one side. Its eyes glowed dimly in the flashlight beam, and then it smiled. Not a friendly smile, a long, wide smile, stretching past where the jaw should end. Teeth yellow, sharp. I dropped the flashlight. The sound of it hitting the floor made it twitch. It hissed, a wet, gurgling sound. I ran for the door. It was locked. I slammed my shoulder against it. Nothing. I tried the windows. All locked. Then it moved. Fast. It came through the living room in a blur, limbs bending the wrong way, crawling over the furniture like it didn't have to obey the rules of gravity. It laughed. Or something like laughter. Deep, wet, and unhuman. I ran into the dining room and grabbed a chair, swinging it at the thing. It shrieked and recoiled, but then it lunged again, faster than I could react. I bolted upstairs. The stairs were narrow, steep, and the thing followed easily, like it had done it 100 times before. I slammed the bedroom door and locked it with every piece of furniture I could shove in front of it. My phone had no signal, of course. The sound of something scratching at the door made my stomach churn, nails across wood. It whispered my name. "Why are you here?" it said. My name, perfectly, from a voice that wasn't mine. Not mine, not anyone's I recognized. I didn't answer. The door shook violently. I slid down the wall and pressed myself into the corner. It didn't break in. Not yet. I don't know why. I think it wanted me to see it, to feel trapped, to know it could get me any time. Hours passed, or maybe minutes. I don't know. The snow outside began to fall harder. The power flickered. The Christmas lights on the tree blinked out, leaving the room dark. I could hear it moving around downstairs, picking things up, breaking things, whispering in low, guttural tones. Finally, at 4 a.m., the sound stopped. I waited until daylight, then opened the door. The house looked normal, nothing broken, no blood, no footprints inside, not even mine. The presents under the tree hadn't been touched. The snow on the porch was undisturbed. Nothing indicated anyone or anything had been there. I called the police. They came and checked the house. Nothing. No forced entry, nothing unusual. Just a perfectly ordinary farmhouse in rural Pennsylvania. I left town that day. I never went back. Over the next several years, I moved across 3 states. Every Christmas Eve, I felt it. At first, just a feeling, like someone was watching me, just beyond the range of sight. Then the noises started. Footsteps in empty rooms, doors opening by themselves. My name whispered when no one else was home. In 2015, I was living in Ohio. On Christmas Eve, around 11:45 p.m., I was asleep when I heard the knock. 3 slow raps on my apartment door. I froze. I didn't answer. Then the sound came from the windows. I ran to the front door and looked through the peephole. A tall figure stood on the other side, coat red and hooded, face obscured by can, smiling. I backed away. By the time I looked again, it was gone. The next year, I moved to Michigan. Same thing. Same night. Same knock. Same feeling of being watched. I've since stopped celebrating Christmas. I don't decorate. I don't go to gatherings. I stay in the city in high-rise apartments where the windows are thick and the doors heavy. Still, I know it doesn't matter, because Christmas doesn't need a door to come inside. It only needs the night. And every Christmas Eve, somewhere just beyond sight or sound, I feel it waiting, watching, smiling, patiently. Story the end. I was 28 when it happened, working as a live-in caretaker for an elderly couple in rural Wisconsin. The couple, the Parkers, had lived in the same farmhouse for over 50 years. The place was old, creaky floors, drafty windows, a fireplace that smoked more than it warmed, but charming in the way only decaying things can be. Christmas was approaching, and I had been hired to stay for the week leading up to the holiday to help with decorations, shopping, and general care. The first few days were uneventful. I cleaned the house, helped Mrs. Parker bake cookies, and assisted Mr. Parker with small repairs. The snow outside fell heavily each night, blanketing the fields and woods surrounding the farmhouse. By Christmas Eve, the snow had piled 3 feet deep. The world outside seemed silent, muffled, like the farm existed in a bubble apart from the rest of reality. That evening, after we finished dinner, Mr. Kai Parker asked me to check the barn. He claimed he had heard noises during the day and wanted to make sure no animals had broken in. The barn was behind the house, connected by a narrow path barely visible under the thick snow. I grabbed my flashlight and pushed open the heavy wooden door. The smell hit me first. Wet hay mixed with something acrid, metallic. I paused, shining my light across the interior. Empty stalls, tools neatly arranged. Nothing. I laughed nervously to myself and turned to leave. But then I noticed it. Footprints. Bare footprints in the snow on the floor, leading from the back of the barn to the front, then out into the snow beyond. The footprints were adult-sized, wide and heavy, and they stopped abruptly in the middle of the barn. I froze. There was no one there. No tracks leading toward the barn from outside. I called out, but only the echo of my voice returned. Shaking, I closed the barn door and went back inside. I told Mr. Parker, but he just waved it off. "Old snow can settle weirdly," he said. "Don't let it spook you. Christmas Eve tends to make people nervous." That night, I slept in the guest room near the front of the house. Around midnight, I woke to a faint jingling, soft, deliberate, like bells brushing against each other. My heart raced. I told myself it was probably the wind, or maybe the old tree in the living room with its antique bell ornaments. The sound grew louder, though, and then I heard it. Footsteps. Heavy, slow footsteps crossing the porch outside my window. I grabbed the flashlight and went to the window. The snow was untouched, except for one set of massive footprints leading from the edge of the woods to the front door. I called out, but no one answered. The doorknob rattled slightly, as if someone had tried it. I grabbed the phone, but there was no signal. The power flickered. I was alone, truly alone, in a house in the middle of nowhere, with someone or something outside that should not have been there. I woke Mr. Parker. He was awake immediately, alert in a way that made my skin crawl. He listened to my story quietly, then nodded. "You saw it too, then?" "What do you mean?" I asked. He hesitated, then said, "He comes every Christmas, always at night, always when the snow falls this thick." I thought he was joking. He wasn't. He told me the story of the figure that had haunted the Parkers' property for decades. A man in a Santa suit, tall, broad, with a beard matted and stained and bells sewn into the cuffs of his coat. He called himself a gift giver, Mr. Parker said, but not in the way you'd expect. He brought presents, only to some, and the presents were never good. I laughed nervously. It sounded insane, but Mr. Parker's face was grave, haunted. Around 1:30 a.m., the sound returned. This time, it wasn't just outside. The jingling was inside the house, moving from room to room. Rusty, the Parkers' old dog, growled and barked, his fur standing on end. I followed the sound to the kitchen. That's when I saw him. Standing in the corner, just beyond the range of the flashlight, was a man, dressed in a Santa suit. His beard was yellowed, matted. His eyes glowed faintly in the dim light. Bells jingled with each step. He held something wrapped in brown paper, tied with red twine. "Christmas is for everyone," he said softly, "and you are invited." I froze. My mouth went dry. My rational brain screamed to run, to call the police, but the phone didn't work. I tried to move, and he tilted his head, watching me carefully, his expression calm, almost patient. Then he moved faster than any man should. In a single step, he was across the room, pressing the wrapped object into my hands. I felt the weight. It was heavier than a package should be. I wanted to throw it down, but couldn't. My fingers tingled as if glued. He leaned close. His breath smelled of pine and rot. "Open it later," he whispered. "But know this, you are part of Christmas now." And just like that, he was gone. The jingling stopped. The lights flickered back on. The snow outside remained untouched. I ran to check every exit. Doors locked, windows latched, yet the footprints outside had vanished. I didn't sleep again that night. I sat in the living room until dawn, staring at the corner where he had stood. When the Parkers awoke, I told them everything. They didn't flinch. They simply nodded, prepared, as if they had known this would happen. In the morning, I saw the package again. I wrapped it tightly and carried it outside, intending to burn it. But when I opened the door, the snow around the house was full of footprints. Dozens of them, circling the house in perfect loops, stopping abruptly at the front porch, then disappearing into the forest. And in the center of the circle, leaning against the porch railing, was another Santa figurine, smaller than the last, handmade, crude, holding a knife instead of a gift. I left immediately. I never returned. The Parkers stayed, every year preparing for the same visitor, each Christmas. I later learned that a child went missing from a neighboring farm that same night. They never found him. I still have the image in my head, the glow of his eyes, the way the bells jingled as he stepped closer. Every year when the first snow falls, I can almost hear it, and I know that wherever I am, he will be coming for someone, for something, for Christmas. It's a warning I've never shared. Until now. Story, the end. I was 28 when it happened, working as a live-in caretaker for an elderly couple in rural Wisconsin. The couple, the Parkers, had lived in the same farmhouse for over 50 years. The place was old, creaky floors, drafty windows, a fireplace that smoked more than it warmed, but charming in the way only decaying things can be. Christmas was approaching, and I had been hired to stay for the week leading up to the holiday to help with decorations, shopping, and general care. The first few days were uneventful. I cleaned the house, helped Mrs. Parker bake cookies, and assisted Mr. Parker with small repairs. The snow outside fell heavily each night, blanketing the fields and woods surrounding the farmhouse. By Christmas Eve, the snow had piled 3 feet deep. The world outside seemed silent, muffled, like the farm existed in a bubble apart from the rest of reality. That evening, after we finished dinner, Mr. Kai Parker asked me to check the barn. He claimed he had heard noises during the day and wanted to make sure no animals had broken in. The barn was behind the house, connected by a narrow path barely visible under the thick snow. I grabbed my flashlight and pushed open the heavy wooden door. The smell hit me first, wet hay mixed with something acrid, metallic. I paused, shining my light across the interior. Empty stalls, tools neatly arranged. Nothing. I laughed nervously to myself and turned to leave, but then I noticed it. Footprints. Bare footprints in the snow on the floor, leading from the back of the barn to the front, then out into the snow beyond. The footprints were adult-sized, wide and heavy, and they stopped abruptly in the middle of the barn. I froze. There was no one there. No tracks leading toward the barn from outside. I called out, but only the echo of my voice returned. Shaking, I closed the barn door and went back inside. I told Mr. Parker, but he just waved it off. Old snow can settle weirdly, he said. Don't let it spook you. Christmas Eve tends to make people nervous. That night, I slept in the guest room near the front of the house. Around midnight, I woke to a faint jingling, soft, deliberate, like bells brushing against each other. My heart raced. I told myself it was probably the wind, or maybe the old tree in the living room with its antique bell ornaments. The sound grew louder, though, and then I heard it. Footsteps. Heavy, slow footsteps crossing the porch outside my window. I grabbed the flashlight and went to the window. The snow was untouched, except for one set of massive footprints leading from the edge of the woods to the front door. I called out, but no one answered. The doorknob rattled slightly, as if someone had tried it. I grabbed the phone, but there was no signal. The power flickered. I was alone, truly alone, in a house in the middle of nowhere, with someone or something outside that should not have been there. I woke Mr. Parker. He was awake immediately, alert in a way that made my skin crawl. He listened to my story quietly, then nodded. You saw it too, then? What do you mean? I asked. He hesitated, then said, He comes every Christmas, always at night, always when the snow falls this thick. I thought he was joking. He wasn't. He told me the story of the figure that had haunted the Parkers' property for decades. A man in a Santa suit, tall, broad, with a beard matted and stained and bells sewn into the cuffs of his coat. He called himself a gift giver, Mr. Parker said, but not in the way you'd expect. He brought presents, only to some, and the presents were never good. I laughed nervously. It sounded insane, but Mr. Parker's face was grave, haunted. Around 1:30 a.m., the sound returned. This time, it wasn't just outside. The jingling was inside the house, moving from room to room. Rusty, the Parkers' old dog, growled and barked, his fur standing on end. I followed the sound to the kitchen. That's when I saw him. Standing in the corner, just beyond the range of the flashlight, was a man, dressed in a Santa suit. His beard was yellowed, matted. His eyes glowed faintly in the dim light. Bells jingled with each step. He held something wrapped in brown paper, tied with red twine. Christmas is for everyone, he said softly, and you are invited. I froze. My mouth went dry. My rational brain screamed to run, to call the police, but the phone didn't work. I tried to move, and he tilted his head, watching me carefully, his expression calm, almost patient. Then he moved faster than any man should. In a single step, he was across the room, pressing the wrapped object into my hands. I felt the weight. It was heavier than a package should be. I wanted to throw it down, but couldn't. My fingers tingled as if glued. He leaned close. His breath smelled of pine and rot. Open it later, he whispered. But know this, you are part of Christmas now. And just like that, he was gone. The jingling stopped. The lights flickered back on. The snow outside remained untouched. I ran to check every exit. Doors locked, windows latched, yet the footprints outside had vanished. I didn't sleep again that night. I sat in the living room until dawn, staring at the corner where he had stood. When the Parkers awoke, I told them everything. They didn't flinch. They simply nodded, prepared, as if they had known this would happen. In the morning, I saw the package again. I wrapped it tightly and carried it outside, intending to burn it. But when I opened the door, the snow around the house was full of footprints. Dozens of them, circling the house in perfect loops, stopping abruptly at the front porch, then disappearing into the forest. And in the center of the circle, leaning against the porch railing, was another Santa figurine, smaller than the last, handmade, crude, holding a knife instead of a gift. I left immediately. I never returned. The Parkers stayed, every year preparing for the same visitor, each Christmas. I later learned that a child went missing from a neighboring farm that same night. They never found him. I still have the image in my head, the glow of his eyes, the way the bells jingled as he stepped closer. Every year when the first snow falls, I can almost hear it, and I know that wherever I am, he will be coming for someone, for something, for Christmas. It's a warning I've never shared. Until now. Story, the end.